And as it was mentioned earlier, many times the institutions, state institutions particularly, and the ones who are focused on emergencies, as somebody said, they're just very busy on the day to day. But there's also structural issues that we need to face or deal with. And I believe that the Ministry of Science, Technology, Knowledge, and Innovation is there to be able to help make the structure. We always think that we're a ministry that many times we're not involved in the actual emergency, but everything that they do and all of the knowledge is being generated within the country. They're fundamental to be able to deal with these emergencies with the best tools available. So actually, what gathers us here today regarding the technologies that we are able to put into service, from the forest fires or just fires in general, natural disasters, they come from the investigation, from scientific investigation. And so scientific investigation takes time. Many times it's a long-term project, but if we aren't in charge of being or having the knowledge available, we're not really going to be able to contribute or have a robust chain where we have the knowledge that would then lead to applications, which would then lead to putting them into service for people's well-being. And what we've been able to see, or what has been generated regarding these last fires that we've had, the floods as well, this job or this task of being able to articulate these things is fundamental to be able to think about the emergency on a very short term, and the medium term, and also in the long term. So, as a ministry, we are very busy working on management, risk management, that actually has an integral perspective and that leaves science and knowledge available to the recuperation of our country, the recovery of our country, and that we could also count on better strategies for the anticipation of different natural disasters that we will have. These are things that will happen, and they're going to continue to happen every time and more and more. So, how have we been able to contribute as a ministry throughout this time? Within the framework of the tasks that we were committed to in the recovery plan for the summer fires that was in 2023, our ministry asked for the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of the Environment, CONAF, SENAPRED, and iTrend, and the investigation center, as well as other investigation centers that are linked to emergencies and natural disasters, to be able to contribute in science and knowledge in order to be able to get recovery. So, within this task, starting in February of 2023, we've been able to work in order to articulate the knowledge and the capacities that are available within these research centers, where we've also invested into these investigation centers for many, many years, decades. So we have to be able to use them. We have to use the knowledge that's available. And being able to articulate these investigation or research centers with the public institutes, such as iTrend, and that also iTrend actually makes this happen. How we articulate this and how do we translate this to the things that the public policies need, as well as the different actors that we have in different regions that have been affected. So we bring this together at this table for iTrend and 15 different investigation or research centers throughout the entire country, and with the regional actors, so that they are able to, together with these regional actors from the private sector, the public sector, and also with the civil society of different territories, we're going to be able to build these needs that the different regions need. So we also would be able to see what they require specifically. And we also have regions, the experts will be able to tell us, in the experts in natural disasters know better than I do that these disasters have different characteristics depending on where they occur. So if it's a rural area or an urban area, so our task now is and the work that we did with iChun is to be able to avoid different solutions that would allow us to make a match between these needs that we are bringing up in the regions that are affected by fires and with the offer that is available by part of the research centers. So here we've been working with iTrend for many months to be able to carry this out.
The challenges that we've identified throughout all of this time working are related to having the best information to manage the risks of forest fires, knowing more about the effects of wildfires in ecosystems, and also knowing the consequences of forest fires for the territories so that ministries that are in charge and the institutions in charge of making decisions in times of emergency or of creating public policies to face the different emergencies that we have can have the best information available, the best evidence available. We will soon also create a process for different research centers to be awarded and to generate solutions from the area of public policies to tackle different regions to help decision makers with this. And to finish, we know that risk management and the risk and the risk management is a basic capacity of the state, and as a ministry is the first time that we are involved by coordinating the systems of science, technology, knowledge, and innovation towards companies, organizations of the civil society, communities, and every stakeholders of the communities that will continue supporting during these years of administration are installed, and that all of these activities are embedded, that are part of a comprehensive action plan that allow to support the country with the research and knowledge that all of us are creating, that the state is investing on to create those needs. Thank you. Thank you so much, Undersecretary. Now, our first guest working in the area of security against wildfires, combustion, remediation, environmental remediation, where he specializes in complex environments such as developing areas or complex urban areas, novel architectures and critical infrastructure. This person has played several functions in Queensland University in Australia, Maryland in the United States, and in the Edinburgh University. This is about José Torero, who is an engineer and director of the Civil, Environmental and Geomatic Engineering Department of the University College of London, with a vast trajectory on wildfires and dynamic on fires. Jose has participated on national and international research studies about, for instance, the collapse of the Twin Towers in Ayotzinapa in Mexico, in the World Trade Center in Ayotzinapa in Mexico. He also worked in the prison of San Miguel. We invite Jose Torero to our stage to deliver his take on the prevention and work on forest fires. Welcome, Jose.
Gracias. Muchísimas gracias. Muchas gracias a ITREN por la invitación.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be here to present about forest fires and the importance of data and technologies, and most particularly the importance of treating this as a prevention issue, not necessarily as a response problem. When we speak of complex problems, so we've heard about from government representatives that this is a highly complex problem. It is also a real problem that it exists and that we're seeing on a daily basis, whose frequency continues to increase until there's not just fires
tenemos que empezar por
that are
hacer,
segregated,
hacernos
but
la
we
pregunta
have
de por
fires
qué
throughout
está
the
sucediendo
year, and
esto.
we need to ask ourselves
Y
why
con
this
esa
is
pregunta
happening.
siempre viene la
And
otra
with that
pregunta, que
question,
es
there
qué
also
podemos
comes
hacer
this other
para
question:
tratar
what
de
can we
cambiar
do to
esta
try and
dirección que
change this
aparentemente
trend, this
se perfila
direction
como
that
algo muy
is
fatalista.
apparently being
Lo que
profiled as
puede suceder
something
si seguimos con
highly
esta tendencia y
fatalistic,
no logramos hacer nada
pessimistic,
es
and
que Chile se va a quemar a
Chile
diario.
will
Y
be burning
efectivamente somos
every day if we
conscientes
do not
que
do
no es
anything, and we are
esa
well aware
la
that that
manera en la
is
cual uno
not
tiene
the
que abordar el
way
problema.
to handle this
Ahora,
problem.
la pregunta que uno se hace es,
The
entonces, ¿qué
question
cosas es
one
lo que podemos
asks
hacer?
is
¿Cómo
what
podemos
to do
contribuir
then?
a tratar
How can
de
we
lograr
contribute to
manejar
try
este problema de una
and
manera
manage
adecuada?
this issue
¿Cómo
in a
podemos hacer
proper
un
way?
uso
How can
adecuado de la
we
tecnología? ¿Cómo
use
podemos
this
hacer uso adecuado de la
technology,
información que tenemos
and
disponible
how
y
can
de los
we
recursos
purposefully
que
use the
estamos
resources and
poniendo al
data
servicio de la resolución
to
del
make them
problema?
available
Y la realidad es
to
cómo
solve this
podemos
problem, and how can
distribuir esos recursos
we
que por lo general son
distribute the
recursos
resources
finitos
that are
de una
usually
manera
finite
adecuada
in a
para
proper
poder
way in order
optimizar
to
la prevención,
optimize
para poder optimizar la
prevention,
respuesta, para poder
so as
optimizar
to
el
optimize
manejo de una
response, so as
problemática
to
que se
optimize the
perfila como
management
algo
of a
sumamente
problem that is
complejo.
profiled as something
Entonces,
highly
esta
complex.
presentación
So this
va a tratar
presentation will be
no
about
solamente tratar de dar
not
algunas
only
respuestas,
trying to provide
pero
some
sobre todo
answers,
tratar
but
de ayudarlos a
mostly
formular el
about
problema.
trying to help you
Porque en
formulate the
materia de la
problem.
seguridad contra
Because in
incendios, en
matters
particular en
of
el caso de los
forest
incendios
fire
forestales,
prevention
el
and
principal
wildfires, but most particularly
obstáculo
forest
en
fire
el cual
prevention, the
nos
main
encontramos es
obstacle
que
that we
no
face is
formulamos el
that we are
problema de una
not
manera correcta.
formulating the
Este es
problem
el lugar
in the
donde
right
organizaciones
way.
como
And
ITREN
this is the
tienen
first place where
una
organizations
importancia
such as
enorme,
eTrend play a
porque
key role,
el
because
problema
the
de los incendios
problem of
forestales
forest
no es un
fires
problema
doesn't
simple
lie,
y
well,
no
it's
es un
not
tema
a
que
simple
corresponde
problem, and it's not
solamente a
something
un
that
sector de la ciencia o un sector de la
less in a
tecnología.
single
Es
area
un
of
problema complejo de
science and
muchas
technology,
dimensiones,
but in
donde se van a
many
encontrar una
other
serie de paquetes de
dimensions where you
información
find
que van a estar
bundles of
distribuidos y
information
sectorizados por
distributed and
sector, y alguien tiene
sectorized
que
in
coser
groups that
todos
someone
estos paquetes de
must try
información
and
y
weave.
construir
Try
una
and weave
historia
all of
que
these
nos permite
information bundles
formular
and
el problema de una manera
try
correcta
to create
y
a
de hacer las
story, to see
preguntas
the problem
adecuadas.
in the proper
Le
way,
permite
and
a las
ask the right
organizaciones de gobierno
questions, and
poder
allow the
preguntar qué
government
cosa es lo que
organizations to ask
necesitamos
what
para
is
tratar de
what
resolver
we
este
truly
problema.
need to solve this
Normalmente el
problem.
científico que está
Normally,
abordado a su trabajo del
scientists
día a
that
día
who are
va a
addressing
enfocarse en
their
tratar de
daily
coleccionar
work
los
will
datos
try and
importantes,
collect
en
important
resolver el
data,
problema,
try to
pero cuando
solve the
hablamos
problem
de
that way. But
temas
when we're
en los
speaking
cuales en
of
un extremo
matters
tenemos un problema
for
social,
which on one end we
un
have a
problema de
social
urbanismo, un problema de
concern, an
arquitectura,
urban
un problema de
concern, an
biología, un
architectural
problema de
concern, a
ecología, un problema
biology,
de medio
ecology,
ambiente, un
environmental
problema de
concern,
mecánica de fluidos, de
maybe about
convección, de
fluid
transferencia de calor.
mechanics,
No
heat
podemos
transfer.
pretender que
We
toda esta
cannot
ciencia
just
por sí sola puede
pretend that
coordinarse
this
de una
science on
manera
its own
adecuada
will be
para dar la respuesta
coordinated
a un
in the
problema que
right
tiene
way to
múltiples
provide an
dimensiones.
answer to a problem
Entonces
with
tenemos que
multiple
introducir
dimensions.
estos
So we
elementos de
must
traducción
introduce all of these
que no
translation
solamente nos
elements
permiten
that are
coser
not
todos
only
estos
allow
paquetes de
us
información,
to
pero
weave,
le
to
permite a
knit
los
all of
gobiernos
those
hacer las preguntas
information bundles
adecuadas,
together, but allowing the
informa
government to
al
ask the
gobierno
right
para que el
questions,
gobierno
and it
adquiera un cierto nivel
reports,
de
informs the
entendimiento
government for
que
the
les
to
permite
have a
preguntar lo
right
que
level of
tiene que ser
knowledge
preguntado.
to ask what
Entonces, en
needs
esta
to be
presentación
asked.
voy a
So
tratar
in
de
this
explicar este
presentation, I will
problema,
try to explain this
tratar de
problem
romper
and
ciertos
try
pedazos del
to
problema,
break
identificar,
down
por
some
ejemplo, cuáles
parts of
son
it and
áreas
explain
en las
what
cuales
the
probablemente
areas in
estamos
which
poniendo
probably
demasiado
we are
énfasis, donde el
emphasizing a
énfasis
little
no es
bit
necesario,
too much on,
y en
where we
áreas en
don't
las
need
cuales
to, and
probablemente estamos
areas where
asumiendo
we are
que los
most
conocimientos
likely
existen,
assuming
pero
that
que
there
sin
is
embargo esos
knowledge,
conocimientos no
but
lo son.
unfortunately
Al
there
mismo
isn't
tiempo,
enough
voy a
knowledge. At
tratar
the
de
same time,
explicar
I will
dónde
try
está la
and
información
explain where the
real que
information
podemos
is
utilizar para empezar a responder a
that
este
we can
problema.
use to
Porque
try
lo que
and
no quiero
respond to this
dejar para
problem,
empezar
because what I don't
es que este es
want
un
you
problema
to
de tal
take
nivel
home
de
with
complejidad
uh,
que hoy en
is
día
that
no hay
this
nada que
is
podamos hacer. Lo que
such
sí les puedo
a
decir
complex
desde el
problem that
principio
we cannot
es
do
que hoy en
anything.
día
What
el
I want
problema
to
tiene tal
say
nivel
from
de
the very
complejidad
beginning is
que
that
no
there's
podemos
such
resolverlo del
complexity to
todo,
this problem that we cannot
pero que
fully
podemos dar
solve
pasos
it.
hacia adelante
But the fact
para
that we
tratar
can
de
actually
cambiar
take
esa
steps
tendencia,
to solve
esa
it to change the trend that started with one forest fire at the end of the summer and that today has become multiple fires throughout the country in all over the year. Well, and to try and revert that process to make something more manageable and at the same time allowing us to ask better questions and provide better answers. Yes, that is not a problem that is solved overnight, but a problem that is solved with a series of actions and steps that must be taken in a coordinated fashion, but also with consistency, with rigor, with a set direction where the progression of the problem leads us to a better position to handle it. I will try to face all of the complexity and emphasize on several points to give you a certain idea of what we must understand. But before we begin, a point that I must clarify is that there is a big difference between not having the knowledge and that the knowledge is there, but we just don't have the ability to use it. So you'll realize that as part of this presentation, there are areas where technology, science, and knowledge are there. But there are stakeholders or actors that have not built up the ability, the capacity to take it in, and then that is a very important point because today we are living in a world where technology and the amount of data and knowledge is so vast, so why is that we've created a new problem? How do we assimilate, how do we integrate all of that to try and provide an answer to a real problem? So to start with, we need to make something really clear. There's two fundamental dimensions to this problem. One of them is that the problem is evolving and is evolving in a direction that is being pushed by climate change. Climate change is changing the nature of the problem. And how is it changing it? Well, it's displacing the problem towards other regions. So in South America, 30, 40 years ago, the problem of forest fires was a problem relegated to the south of Brazil or some areas in Colombia, so peripheral areas of the Amazon. But today, that has been displaced to the southwest. So Chile, Argentina, because the climate conditions are changing in such way that the vegetation is evolving and the climate characteristics are changing. So those fires that were fundamentally here are now affecting other different areas. In the same way, in North America, the fire that used to happen in California and Arizona and New Mexico are today something that has entered strongly into Canada. So it started to be displaced towards the north. So we see these interfaces in urban and forest areas, such as in London, where the fires did not exist in the past. And we have also situations, that's what's happened in Siberia in 2021, where there was a huge fire where for centuries nature wildfire of this nature hadn't happened. So we have different spheres of the problem. There's not only been a transformation in the areas where it was previously present, but we must also acknowledge that once the cycle has started, it's a cycle that doesn't end until we make decisions and make the necessary interventions to try and solve the problem. But in many cases, it's not only about climate change, but sometimes it's about the society, the politics, economics, and it's about how we manage the territory. Those transformations can create situations leading us to fires, and in other areas we can make decisions, for instance, to develop the industrial process growth for forestry and develop risks that did not exist in the past. So that combination of societal, economic, political problems is evolving for areas that were well, fires do not exist, and the characteristics of these forest fires is that they transform the vegetation in such a way that the trend to create these fires is increasing. So once they are there, they don't leave, and we need to change the vegetation's direction so that they disappear. The fire has a social dimension that we cannot ignore. This is a translation of an article of two Chilean researchers, Mr. Reisca and Mr. Cifuentes, and I would like to emphasize a few words about this text. The first question that one must ask ourselves is how a fire can affect a city of a very big city in the same way that big fires destroyed European cities centuries ago. So it's the same principle that we thought we solved in the past. Large urban fires disappeared at some point and became building fires. That's why we created building codes and not urban building codes for fires especially. But what came next was that many of the households that were affected by the fires were of low-income families, and the trend of this sort of problems has been amplified in areas in which the economic resources are limited. The combustible material was high. The combustible load generated by the vegetation was high, not only because of the high density of the households, but because of the trash accumulated on sites that were not built. That promoted the propagation of the fire. That show you the evolution of this sort of event. The catastrophic event reflects many of the social inequalities, and we cannot allow for an event of this nature to have an impact, a social impact that is much more important in areas of less privilege. Finally, the building codes in Chile still do not include inflammation criteria and propagation of the flame for construction materials because, well, why is this happening? Why are we not incorporating all of the variables that are needed to handle this problem in a proper way? These are the questions that one must ask. And in order to describe an event such as the Valparaiso big fire, is the reflection of a problem that is not being handled in a right way. So, what we are talking about is a highly complex problem with social, economic, and environmental dimensions that cannot be trivialized. But this is another problem that we have in this space, is that we have this trend to simplify, to trivialize a problem to such a point where you start losing the key notions to solve the problem. Once someone told me that the fire is like a football match. When you are watching TV, watching your team, and they're not playing very good, you can criticize the referee, the trainer, the technical director, but it's very different to be playing on the field, being there on your couch criticizing everyone because things aren't working. And the trend that we have is to treat that problem like that, very trivially, to try and think that we all understand fire, and we're simplifying it to a point where its essence is lost. So everyone has an opinion about the fire, everyone knows what needs to be done, and the amount of times where I enter a room and I say the problem with the fire is this one, and the first thing that happens is that people lecture me about everything that I should have been doing without understanding that the moment that they're trying to explain to me in such a simple way, what they're evidencing is a lack of understanding of the problem and thus the potential to make mistakes. This is not a simple problem. This is a highly complicated problem with a number of dimensions that demands for an understanding that is fundamental to analyze all of the information that we have available.
So what's the first thing that we have to understand? Forest fires are phenomenons that are physical. They are governed by the laws of physics, and they have this particularity regarding the other risks, natural risks. this is a problem that varies throughout time and space. So, what does this mean exactly? That the fire is going to start here and is going to end there. And within this period of time that we have that's available to us, we're able to change the trajectory of this event. So, we can transform this event from a absolutely insignificant event to a catastrophic event. So, this trajectory that this goes through, and fundamentally, it's our responsibility. We have the responsibility to be able to manage these things in a certain kind of way that will be the trajectory, will be the correct one. So you can't change an earthquake. You can't change a flood. You can design so that our systems can respond correctly to an earthquake or would respond correctly to a flood. You can change the fire as well. And so this is the basic and main difference between the fire and the rest of the natural disasters. It's going to generate material damage and affect people negatively, but it's a risk that we're able to manage in a very adequate way. So this management doesn't just have to happen at the time of the response. This management also has to do with also through prevention and the understanding of the problem, and through the responsible urbanism and an adequate forest fire management, and also the data that is being collected to be able to see the risks through analysis that is allowing me to establish in what direction the risk is going and how I can predict where it's going to. So here's where we realize that sometimes we lose time. So how do we lose time?
Centrándonos, por ejemplo, en el encendido. Muchas veces cuando se habla de fuegos forestales, lo primero de lo cual hablamos es cómo empezó. Ese no es el problema. El incendio va a empezar. Nosotros tenemos que construir nuestro medio de una manera tal que el incendio pueda responder correctamente. No evitar el encendido. Por supuesto, podemos educar a la gente para que se comporte de una manera responsable. Podemos introducir todo tipo de medidas de protección en aparatos eléctricos, en edificaciones y todas esas cosas para tratar de minimizar la probabilidad de un incendio. Pero la realidad es que la probabilidad de un incendio es 1. El incendio se va a dar. Y por ende, como el incendio se va a dar, tenemos que aprender a responder. Entonces, en vez de poner todo nuestro énfasis en decir que tenemos que tratar de evitar el incendio, tratemos de pensar más cómo lo vamos a manejar. Entonces, tenemos que reconocer que hay 2 tipos de incendios. El incendio puede ser voluntario o el incendio puede ser accidental. El incendio voluntario es un crimen y por ende nosotros tenemos que tratar el incendio voluntario como un crimen, mientras que el incendio accidental puede ser generado por una persona, pero puede ser también un rayo, puede ser un elemento, y tenemos que considerar tanto la parte natural como la parte de generación humana. Pero este espacio del incendio voluntario, ese espacio es un crimen. Y esto no es el enfoque que debemos darle. No tenemos que enfocarnos en el encendido o en el incendio voluntario, sino que tenemos que enfocarnos en cómo va a crecer ese incendio y cómo logramos manejar ese proceso de crecimiento para tener un nivel de pérdidas aceptables. Entonces, esa es la prevención. Y eso es la dirección en la cual tenemos que poner nuestros recursos y tratar de entender cómo prevenimos las cosas correctamente. Ahora, evidentemente, este es un concepto integral de seguridad que uno tiene que tener en cuenta y tiene que considerar el rol de diferentes elementos como el crimen. Y uno tiene que poner la legislación adecuada para tratar de generar los mecanismos para empujar a la sociedad lo más lejos posible de ese tipo de actitudes. Pero la realidad es que estas cosas se van a dar y pretender que el incendio no va a suceder es un problema. Entonces lo que tenemos que hacer es enfocarnos en la prevención. De la misma manera, cuando hablamos de prevención, podemos hablar de normas, de reglamentación, podemos hablar de desarrollo de profesionales, de gente con la competencia, la capacidad para poder entender el problema y manejarlo correctamente, al mismo tiempo que tratar de enfatizar la respuesta apropiada. Ahora, muchas veces cuando doy esta presentación hay quienes piensan que yo voy en contra de la respuesta, porque muchas veces voy a enfatizar el concepto de prevención y decir que la respuesta es un componente. Pero eso lo quiero responder con una pregunta hacia ustedes. Tenemos un cuerpo de bomberos que va a venir a responder cuando tenemos un problema que ya ha llegado a una cierta dimensión que requiere una intervención directa. ¿Okay? ¿Qué tan grande es el incendio que el cuerpo de bomberos puede manejar? ¿Cuáles son las condiciones que permiten un manejo seguro y eficiente de un incendio forestal? Cuando el incendio tiene una dimensión tal que es inmanejable y tenemos que reconocer que es inmanejable, y para tratar de bajar el nivel de riesgo del cuerpo de bomberos tenemos que decidir que este es un incendio en el cual no podemos intervenir. Esas son preguntas que tienen que tener respuesta. Y la realidad es que en el concepto de prevención tenemos que entender cuál es el incendio que le estamos entregando al cuerpo de bomberos para que pueda responder de una manera segura y eficaz. No podemos darle todo el incendio. Esa mentalidad del siglo XIX, en el cual el bombero es el héroe que viene a salvar todos los incendios, no importa cuál hemos entregado, todos los incendios tienen que ser manejados por el cuerpo de bomberos. Eso va completamente en contra de toda nuestra legislación de seguridad en el empleo, porque el incendio es el lugar de trabajo del cuerpo de bomberos. Entonces tenemos que tener en cuenta que en el fondo esa relación entre el cuerpo de bomberos y la prevención es una relación natural e importante y tiene que haber un énfasis en establecer una relación adecuada entre esos dos participantes. El énfasis en el encendido, yo no estoy diciendo que hay que eliminarlo, pero esta no es la prioridad. El encendido se va a dar y la probabilidad de un incendio
start off, but the fire is going to start. We just have to be able to stop us from going to a catastrophic event and do this in a way that generates damage, that the least amount of damage, and this is unacceptable for society today. So if we start talking about this problem, we have to be able to generate the regulations for safety and also be able to develop an understanding that will allow us to manage this correctly. So the adequate prevention measures, the main objectives are the management of consequences and the response that is given to these fires. We also have to understand the problem, and we have to know where to put the resources in order to be able to manage the problems in an adequate way. So the objectives are to avoid the fire. It's not possible to avoid a fire. A prevention strategy that is adequate is when a fire occurs. So the probability of having a fire is 1. Managing the consequences is managing the consequences as a result of the prevention measures that are implemented before the fire. And then the response is the effectiveness of this response is a direct function that is measured with the implemented prevention status, and they're not going to respond in an adequate way if they don't have all of the information. So, what's the information or the data that we have, what we know? Today, we perfectly understand the water cycle. So we know where it evaporates, we know how to measure the humidity on the floor, we also know how to collect data about precipitation, and all of this information is being collected every day. The richness of the data within this space is absolutely fundamental. So the water, for example, the absorption of plants determines the type of vegetation and the velocity of the growth. So, in other words, we have this information, but it's information that we have to collect on a yearly basis. Because if we're going to predict and establish the trends, we have to understand how the vegetation is evolving and how it's related to the water cycle, and also how this is going to give me different conditions that now I am able to predict. So this field is something that it's very developed, and all of the information is available already. The problem is that we are using this information in order to be able to resolve the forest fire problem. So the reality is that no, we're not using this, and we're not making projections for vegetation that allow me to establish a risk map that is adequate, and that also allows me to predict how the problem is evolving. So this isn't a space where information is missing. This is a space where we're not using the information properly. In the same way, when we do this temporary assessment, we will have all different types of technologies. So we will be able to have the NDVI and the NDWI, where it's going to talk about the water index, and this one's related to humidity. And so we all collect this data from geoinformatics through satellites. The data is there. The collection time is within limits, and we can establish what the evolution of this vegetation is. So here we have two different types of vegetation. We have the tree and we have the bush. So the risk of a forest fire becomes unmanageable when the top of the tree, the canopy of the tree, caught fire. So in order to be able to minimize the risk of a fire, we have to manage what's happening on the bush level in order to prevent that the canopy of the tree catches fire. So if we're able to manage it and actually make it remain on the ground level, the tree has evolved genetically that we have a very resistant trunk towards the fire, and we only have the canopy of the tree that would be vulnerable. So the reason that fires would actually catch the canopy, it has to do with the robustness of the vegetation towards the fire. So we do manage all of this information. Our satellites gather this information on a permanently. So the question that we have to ask is, are we using it correctly? So why don't we use it? Because we're missing one part of the puzzle.
No ponemos ningún esfuerzo en entender cómo la evolución de esta vegetación transforma la inflamabilidad de la vegetación. Esta información es un hueco enorme en todo lo que es nuestro conocimiento, que nos deshabilita la utilización de toda esta información tecnológica que los satélites proveen para tratar de resolver un problema real. Entonces acá tenemos un ejemplo donde los datos existen, donde sabemos que tenemos que seguir esa evolución temporal durante años, y porque nos falta ese pedazo del rompecabezas, no nos damos cuenta cuál es el valor de la información y por ende no la recolectamos, porque no sabemos cómo utilizarla. Entonces, si resolvemos el problema real de esa falta de información en el espacio adecuado, el resto de la información, el resto de la tecnología disponible adquiere un valor diferente y empezamos a entender cómo podemos utilizarla.
So the risk evolution, to be able to build risk management and establish this evolution, we need to be able to collect data and also establish this TC implies it implies years of time. So this brings to the parameters that help with the, if we don't have this kind of information, then this information loses all of its value. So the technology that allows us to have all of this information, but if we're not collecting it, why aren't we collecting it? Because there's one crucial stage where we have to understand combustibility. This is what happened in Canada. They have risk maps, but these maps were static because all of the information for combustibility of the vegetation belongs to studies that were done 30 years ago. So with the evolution of climate change, the vegetation has absolutely transformed. So the river is now a completely different river, and from night to day, there's a fire that happens that we don't know how it's going to spread. So in the same way, we can also understand that the problem of how this flame or this fire is propagated, and it has to do with combustion. So with this information, I'm able to predict the speed of ignition, and we can also establish the time and the real risks that we have to be able to analyze. So the results of understanding all of this allows me to understand the propagation speed, and it also allows me to understand the time. Because, and why is this important? Because it goes into complete contrast with the actual respond. If this happens very quickly, I cannot respond. So then I'm going to find dimensions that I can't manage, or with a fire that I'm not going to be able to manage. So that's the risk concept. So if we look, for example, for urban planning, we have to evacuate people. This is the Black Saturday in Melbourne, Australia, where the majority of the deaths were in a valley. They occurred in a valley where the fire just grew in a certain direction, and because it was misplanned, there was no way to get people out of this valley. The streets were not constructed for an evacuation. They were done for normal traffic. So when you put all of the cars into these roads, then the roads get congested, and what happens is that people get burned in places where they were. So the losses of people in this case, they are a part of a problem of urban planning. So this is something else, evacuation time. We have to consider the evacuation time, because if the growth of this fire is going to go so fast that I'm not allowed to evacuate people because there is no evaluation that is done adequately for the urban planning for evacuation routes, then becomes a tragedy. In the Oakland fire in California, it's a contrast against those times, because the fire starts near the Caldecott tunnel, so this is very accessible. The firemen can find a manageable fire and they turn off the fire. So as a result, this fire that started here, it doesn't get propagated. On the next day, the winds have changed and the fire was not correctly turned off, so it reignites. And in this case, it goes a different way. And so when the firemen arrive, the fire is too big and they're unable to control it. So the fire continues to propagate, and it covers an enormous area that starts affecting the residential area, which is the University of California in Berkeley, and all of this Berkeley area. So what happens, for example, in the response time was less than the propagation time, so it was successful. In the second case, the response time is longer than the fire, so this is unsuccessful. So now we have this huge fire with extraordinary dimensions, and it destroys all of the hills in Oakland, and it starts getting to a point where if you get to this element, or the Claremont Hotel, the Claremont Hotel is a huge combustion risk, and if it's lost and it burns, then the fire would continue to propagate towards Berkeley, and it would have destroyed this entire side of the city. So just because it was such an evident risk, the firefighters had a plan. So when it starts going in this direction, all of these zones are stopped so that we can stop the hotel. So you can see this enormous dimensions that was built in wood, and you can see how close the fires were to the Claremont Hotel. But however, the hotel was managed to be saved. So as a result, this is another case where the time for response is shorter than the propagation time. This is correct planning, is understanding the risk and putting the resources in the right place. So evidently the risk has been changed, because if you look at this picture at the time that the Claremont Hotel is being built, the vegetation is absolutely different than the vegetation that exists at the time of the fires. And this is another part of the problem that is fundamental. So the investment in resources that are necessary cannot only be the only resource. We need to have a plan B, and plan B is prevention. So the accumulated risk defines the efficiency of the response. So critical conditions, the critical time we have within a short term, it's complex. There's a lot of temperature, high winds, and in a couple of days or weeks maybe, they go to a degradation of the vegetation, which could generate the problem. So we also have the meteorological information. Yes, we collect this on a daily basis. We have it throughout the entire country, of course. And we have the topography, which allows me to generate a model that will predict where the fire is coming from. And what is missing? The same thing, the relationship between the evolution of the short-term vegetation and the fire itself. If I don't understand this, I'm not going to be able to use any of the data. So here is where we start talking about the complexity of things. So we can start to try to substitute these basic models for very complex ones, but we do have to acknowledge that all of these models have to do with combustion. If we don't understand it correctly, then we're not going to be able to use these models correctly. The risk maps that we have, the models are very useful to evaluate potential fires and to be able to generate these risk maps. But, however, the models aren't enough. They're not precise enough, and they're not robust enough, and they don't deliver the results that you can deliver in a quick manner, because these take hours and hours to go through. So the time in the model has to be consistent with the time of the event. So we have this map where we have these information, these models, and whatever else we need, but we don't have how to use it. We don't know how to use it. So complicating things isn't going to help. So today we talk about artificial intelligence and data analysis. Of course, that's very important, is to be able to manage the data. There's so much information that we need to be able to manage correctly, but we also have to understand the phenomenon. And this is a phenomenon where, despite the fact that you have planes and drones and meteorological places or buildings, the amount of data isn't compatible with artificial intelligence. The organization of data is compatible, but be able to inform a model for artificial intelligence with data that comes from this nature, it doesn't allow me to resolve the problem in a robust and fast manner. So there are phenomenons that come together, don't come together, and sensibility. All of these things are the compensation for the points of inadequacy for artificial intelligence that complicate the use of AI. So the data and AI needs to be used adequately. The easiest or most appropriate way is to be able to display a physical map and use the data that we have and also the physical model as a translation technique. That's what we aspire to today. So what we're trying to do is accumulate data, put them into a physical model, and then this physical model will be controlled by the data in order to give speed and robustness and precision. So even though we're headed in that direction, the truth is that this direction needs a level of competence to all of the people who are using it. And this is where I feel that the function of a series of organizing like the government and iTrend, the communication between these different institutions to be able to establish what is the best way to continue to have this process in a direction where they can get the answers they need. So what is an adequate investment policy? Forest fires are a social, economic, and environmental problem. It's not something that we can ignore. It's something that is already here, and it won't go away unless we do something correctly. The risk management that represents that forest fires represent on a long term, it is in a long term, but it also has to take into consider all of the relevant times. This is a problem in evolution of time, and also the investment has to be done on the basis of a complete understanding of the problem. It's very complex and it can't be trivialized or sectorized. Somebody has to be able to put all of these elements together and tell a story and establish a communication mechanism between the scientists, the government, response actors, and everybody who is participating, all of the actors that are in this space, to be able to communicate throughout the process, to be able to transfer the information in an integral manner. All of the prevention and response actors need investment, but this should be done in a very balanced way. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket, and please think very clearly that this isn't a problem to eliminate the fire. We're not going to eliminate the fire. It's trying to manage the fire or the consequences of the fire. Understanding the problem allows us to use the adequate tools. We have very many tools. We have much data, and we have all of the information in the world. We just don't have... We need to be able to find the pieces of the puzzle that we're missing to be able to use this information adequately. So one example of the puzzle that is missing. We need to be able to identify these pieces and fill in the gaps or the voids for all of this data that we have available in multiple sectors of science and technology. And so today, and in a global level, the problem of forest fires is being treated in a sectorized manner and with an unbalanced investment. This is not a Chilean problem. This is a global problem. Everywhere we're having the same problem, and we're not able to respond completely to the challenge that climate change brings forward. So I just wanted to finish off with this and with this very simple message. I believe that this is a problem that is fundamental in the aspects of communication. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jose. You're going to stay very close to us because you're also going to be a part of the panel that's coming up. So before we continue, we would like to say goodbye to the Undersecretary who has to go, as well as the Technical Capacities Manager of Corfo. Thank you very much for your presence. And of course, through Chile Resiliente, the idea is to be able to have a talk and reflect about these topics that were being presented by Jose. For example, the relevance of what to do with all of this data, and with the data that's available today, but we also have to manage them in an adequate form. So, Jose, I would like for you to come forward. I'd like to ask you a question while we are accommodating our space for the panel. Is there any cardinal item that is extremely important for in order to be able to begin the management of forest fires and be able to face them in a better way, and also be able to avoid for these to become catastrophic forest fires, as you were commenting before? Is there something that's particularly important that we need to be relevant about today?
I believe we need to separate the technical problem from the fundamental problem, because the fundamental problem is a communicational problem. We need to be honest and open among all of the sectors operating in this sector, because we need to identify where we lack the elements, the pieces of the puzzle, so that we can capitalize on the information, the richness and vastness of information available. There is no magic wand from the technical perspective, because it cannot be trivialized. This problem, it's a problem of huge complexity, and the only thing that can solve it is efficient, constant, and long-term communication among all of the stakeholders involved in this problem. Thank you so much. We invite you to participate in the panel that's coming next, an invitation that is open to us also as media communicators to not simplify this problem. We invite you to this following panel. We remind you that you can send your questions to the panel members through the Slido platform. You can do this by scanning the QR platform that is on your credentials. And for those of you connected via YouTube, the iTrend channel, you can enter to slido.com, and once you find the app, you can enter to Chile Resiliente or use the hashtag 1840-145. With that, you can send your questions. And we invite now the rest of the panelists. You can sit down, Jose, of course, while we invite the rest of our panel members. I'd like to invite Gabriel Quijada, head of the Risk Management Office of the Nacimiento Municipality. He is a risk prevention manager and forestry engineer of INAP. He's focused on the cycle of risk, and he's a SENA-bred instructor. He's currently focusing on running a community prevention cycle to execute the self-prevention program in the community of Nacimiento. Thank you for joining us. We invite Cristian Olivares, academician from an IT specialist from Fire Says, a researcher in data science and software, with working on the implementation of predictive models and research, also data mining and behavior of the user, and learning mediated by technology in the context of social and natural disasters, leading the technology platform development that seek to increase the participation of citizens. That is so important to connect all of the entities. Incendio platform seeking to measure the social perception of fires. We now invite Pedro Contreras, coordinator of the local response project to adaptation to climate change, Caritas Chile, social worker with Andrés Bello University, focused on community interventions for the reduction of disaster risk prevention, and the community of Valparaíso, one of the examples of Jose. Since 2019, he's been a part of Caritas Chile group in community service for the adaptation to climate change, prevention of wildfires, and the management of disaster risks in several districts along the country. We now invite our last member of the panel, Catalina Undurraga, Executive Director of IDREN, our moderator. She's a political scientist, Director of the Institute of Science Politics Institute in Paris, and with a diploma in technology management with 12 years of experience in the ecosystem of science, technology, knowledge, and innovation, promoting collaborations between the state, academia, industry, and civil society, particularly to um, make science and technology closer to making. We invite all of you, thank you, and invite you to discussing the adoption of technologies in the territories. We invite you to take all of the notes, and I include myself in that. And we are going to take all of your questions. We're going to visibilize the different initiatives and the projects that are being conducted in the country at the same time, interacting with you in the presentation, and also not for you here, but through Slido platform for those joining us online.
So we're going to start off with any questions that we have. We're going to start off with Christian. You developed an application that is to be able to manage social perception for fire risks. So can you tell us a little bit about how it works and what you've been able to gather from this, from what you've been developing, and who it benefits as well? Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to comment a little bit about how this starts off. So they asked me to be part of the FISIS nucleus, and this integrates and makes the problem more complex for the study of forest fires. So this is where different disciplines converge. So with this transdiscipline conversion, we've been trying to understand what the perception is to be able to get the citizens through forest fires, because we always use different models, and we generate, how Jose was saying, the different amount of data that's allowing us to understand how these work, and also we forget about what the citizens are actually perceiving on a daily basis. So within this time frame, we're trying to be able to construct a systemization function, so that it's just not on a determined time, but a consistent and as Jose also mentioned, be able to generate enough data to be able to understand what the form is and what the comprehension is regarding forest fires. So in that context, throughout the year, we've been able to develop the first part of this project, which is a research project that is scientific and technological, where we were able to develop a mobile app to be able to ask people about their perspectives. So we give them different elements from the vegetation around them, and we've been able to get a lot of information through there, especially through these images. And through these images, we're able to identify or know on which point of the georeferenced territory what people are actually referring to with forest fires regarding prevention, mitigation, how we control these fires, and how we respond to the fires as well. So how we're also able to recover or restore after the forest fires occur. So this information has been gathered in a very experimental studio that we're finishing up. This is the first year of the project, and throughout this experimental study we've been able to analyze what are the different consensus that exist throughout the dimensions of this fire and how it affects each one of the territories. We've been able to identify different differences, and we can say that these correspond to municipalities that are more rural or they're urban. We've been able to work in 2 different municipalities, and also if people actually belong to interface areas or to rural areas. So the fact that there is a consensus doesn't mean that people have a correct perception or a correct understanding of these dimensions. There's only a consensus on the population regarding what they perceive from these different dimensions. And other than just recovering this information or gathering this information, we tried to identify how this affected these different platforms in the perception that people had regarding the management of forest fires. And so in order to do this, we had to develop an instrument or a scale, and this is where it's relevant when psychology experts are involved, because we had to define what we understood as perception and then build our instruments that would allow us to measure. So starting from the study that we started off, that was around 550 people that participated in the study, we were able to identify that the people who were using the platform were actually improving their perception, their social perception of restoring and the psychosocial standards. And this is all very important because it means that the app that is within this small study that we're just beginning, we've already been able to see an effect on the citizenship that is on the citizens that are using this platform. So we can also generate data which is going to be available publicly so they can be used by other researchers or public entities as well as private entities that have to do with the consent that there is. But we can also see if there's an effect over the citizens on the use of the platform. This is mainly because of the language that the citizens are acquiring in the use of technology. Thank you very much, Christian. Obviously very adequate with the title of this panel and with all of the different factors that we've been able to face through the initial speeches up to this conversation. So it's very interesting too to realize what the differences are from one municipality to another. And Jose was mentioning this earlier, so depending on the topography and the vegetation and the meteor, we're going to go to the municipality of Nacimiento, and I wanted to see if you can just give me a brief comment or context of what was going on in this last fire season, and also the work that you did in order to prevent this fire, to be able to have this vision starting from a local government. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you for the welcome, and we are a forest community. So in this sense, the municipalities are the system that are most available to citizens. So the mayors have the great responsibility to be able to make this information valid for us. During the summer, we had a huge disaster because Nacimiento, 43,000 hectares were burnt down. That also reflects around 50% of the municipal area. So this disaster got a part of the mountain range. One of them has started Thursday at around noon, and burnt the community of Santa Juana. And then on Friday, it starts from Angol, from the 9th region, that gets to Nacimiento around 9 or 10 p.m. And so both of these fires got together and converged. This area, which is very available combustion, it's what generates these disasters today. the sensation or the feeling that we got was of being impotent because getting to so many people is impossible. The emergency organizations, under any circumstances anywhere, are able to take on this amount or this huge magnitude. So we had to be able to see if we could deliver emergency responses so that we can also manage the local risk. So it's also something that we're trying to promote. One of the most relevant one that I would like to share with you has to do with the certification or the cert courses that are for first responders, where we work through a regional table together with Sednapred, which is a group of inspectors where we go through different communities throughout the year, and we give different people ways to be able to manage risk control. So there's around 7 or 8 different modules where you can use fire extinguishers, emergency psychology, and other different lines that you could actually promote. On the other hand, as a municipality, we're also talking about implementing a school, either urban or rural schools, and they're territorial institutions where you can get together, the neighbors watch or sports club, to be able to make this manageable and more specifically for self-prevention. It is a long-term challenge, and we need to be able to get to as many people as possible. And then another line that's very important is the work that we do together with the police force, with the fire department, with CONAF, with private entities, with hospitals, the municipality, etc., which is a job that is articulated on field where there are different operations that are held out, the door-to-door operations, preventive operations, in order to strengthen communities as well and attack on one side what GONAF is saying, that 70% of the fires are intentional in our municipality and the other 30 are from negligence. So since there's a crime, as someone mentioned before, and this is the majority of the percentage, so the job of the entities such as the investigation or police department is fundamental because it is a felony. And we go on the other hand, which is with the communities for the lack of people and care.
Thank you so much, Gabriel, for sharing that experience of the Nacimiento district. You also shared about the importance of having the coordination among the different stakeholders, the different entities that are involved, either directly or indirectly, which is why I would like to now delve into the roles of the civil society and ask Pedro, could you please tell us about the work that Caritas has done to control the forest fires of last year in particular? What are the communities that you worked with, and what is the work that you do exactly? Yes, thank you. I would like to start to referring to what Jose mentioned. This is an environmental, economic, and social problem when you work in the prevention and the disaster risk prevention management. Since September, Caritas Chile, in collaboration with CONAF, started a participatory process to reduce the risk of disaster in 14 communities in the regions of Valparaíso and Ñuble. Unfortunately, a forest fire happened in Ñuble region where 2 communities that were part of the project were affected. Quillón, more specifically, Peña Blanca and Santa Ana de Caimaco communities, where we first started to rebuild certain relations and work on the impact, working in a series of issues created directly by forest fires, but also related to the community. And it's with this I'm referring to the complexity that Jose mentioned in his presentation because of the circumstances of climate change. The entire ecosystem And all of what the communities that are exposed to are more acute every day, and how the droughts are happening. In this scenario of difficulties in Valparaiso and Viña del Mar, there were also fires where communities, neighboring communities, were devastated and others watched. So it's a part of the complexity of how we manage risk. In this case, and as part of the Caritas risk model about community intervention arising from the earthquake disaster in 2010, there's a systematized model in time, and based on the circumstances and the climate change, we focused on our action and the prevention with the participation of different stakeholders. There's relevant actors as local governments through their municipalities, particularly their offices of risk, disaster, disaster risk prevention and emergency. There's a service with the community, but also the main role of processes. When I'm referring to this main role, is the main role of community leaders from a gender perspective, because there are resources that are not only material but human. And in that sense, the model that Caritas works with based on this work comes from the organization meeting, coming together to work along with the community to define these risks. It depends on how we prepare also to these future adverse events, in this case forest fires. And there's a fundamental part here, and that is training. Our colleague from Nacimiento mentioned the CERT courses as an instance to train, as a resource of knowledge in territories to work on the training with certain roles and exercising the leadership and seeing how the response behaves in situations of emergency, and how we are working deeply on prevention of forest fires with the complexities of the territory. We mentioned that Caritas works with 14 communities, and we have 14 different realities, 14 different leaderships, 14 different status of poverty, multidimensional poverty. And when the project from this model that Caritas works with provides financing to create forest fire reduction programs, the community component shifts in relation to a more territorial organization, and there are lessons learned that we can comment on in the panel. Thank you, Pedro. Very interesting. Let me tell you that several questions are coming through Slido, and I'm emphasizing as long as soon as you have those, you need to scan the QR that is made available for you. Jose.
In your presentation, you commented that there were different factors, and you emphasized a lot on the need of how we use the data that are available or not, and the importance of being able to have these pieces of the puzzle that are well identified in order to be able to face the problem properly and be able to understand it properly as well. But since we're talking about the territories in themselves, if you were able to comment a little bit of the measures that you can adopt as a community or people to be more prepared when facing these fires, do you think that I'm taking questions from the audience as well? Do you think that they're useful? It depends. The reality is that, as you said, it's a puzzle. And so within this puzzle, if we do use the community to be able to contribute in a coordinated manner with the others, then the community could actually have extraordinary value. But if we're trying to treat the community as something that is completely isolated from all of the rest of the components, then we are just more aware and have this component and not getting mixed up with the other people just to get to the response and the final answer. So at the end of the day, it's very evident that we have this is a race against time, and the response has to do with the growth of the fire. So the community, or the most privileged community, to be able to access the fires as fast as possible, the community has been given the tools and the training, and the topic of the fire has been able to taken appropriately, then the community has a huge force to be able to reduce the risk. So in Greece, for example, the Greek islands, since they're all isolated between themselves, then it's very hard to get the first responders. But it could have a very immense value, but they have to be integrated within the complete story. Thank you, Jose. And apropos of this topic, and this is what brings us together here today, the technology, how can it help us to strengthen these different stages for the prevention or the preparation, the community preparation for this? Gabriel, how have you seen this specifically in the experience in Nacimiento, in the city of Nacimiento? Well, actually, it's been pretty positive. When we were able to deliver these issues and we were able to accompany these communities throughout the year to be able to have this prevention training and the National Corporation for Forest Fires. So we've been able to measure the effects that this delivery of tools throughout these fires. And so in this sense, it's been positive, and the analysis has been positive because they have been empowered over their territory. They know it very well. They know the topography. They know where the houses are. They know the water availability in the sector, which is also a very important point to be able to save rural areas. So when these people are being articulated as a community and they have the proper communication tools, because they've applied to different projects where they have radios where there's very little phone service, so they also put this into practice, and they've been able to save critical places such as hospitals and schools, which is the infrastructure that's most relevant to a community. So the positive analysis, we believe that as a municipality and the mayor of Nacimiento is helping us move forward within this to be able to give out different tools and capacities to organizations that are most exposed to risk. So we're prioritizing sectors and then obviously continue to grow towards this municipality that is that is a big part of the forestry industry in Chile. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. Particularly, I'm interested in the topic of participation or civil participation in this area, and I would like to mix it and also be a part of this panel, the technology, with the civil participation and how we're able to take this to the territories. Christian, you're talking about the science, community science. Could you be able to help us understand how this is part of the application and what the importance is about this? The concept of civil science, as a team, we've been working on it because we believe that it's necessary to be able to open science up and to be able to integrate the citizens in the process of knowledge through different types of technologies in different stages. So usually it's through gathering data, generating data from the citizens' approach so that we can analyze this and make them valuable. In particular, in this project, we've gone a little bit further. What we've tried to do is involve citizens, but not just in the generation of data, but also in the construction or co-construction of these instruments that we're able to generate, and also of the applications that we've been developing. So this has a key factor for commitment, as I mentioned before, of the citizens, because then the areas are open for the understanding of what's being built and why. And finally, what is the purpose of what is being built? So forgetting this space of academic capitalism where I'm going and I'm taking information out from the citizens, is that together with the citizens and the people who know the territory very well, as was mentioned earlier, the people who know the routes, the people that know the different trails, and that they know that we have to go to X house to be able to get together because it's the easiest place to get to. With these people, we have to be able to construct these technologies, and validating them scientifically is very relevant. So this is also where we've seen that the commitment for the use of technology has also been a very important factor. This is generally due to the fact that we're getting a lot of attention in the beginning because they're used to these academics who go and consult data, but they don't return data. So now they see a return and they see how valuable it is for the construction of knowledge, for the construction of different models, and to be able to generate also different management tools, starting with the Ministry of Interior, and also generating data to be able to construct elements that would allow us to build what the value is that each member is giving to the territory, and together with their own realities, actually have the management for forest fires. And this is where the relevance of citizen science goes in.
Thank you so much. I would now like to ask Pedro and his experience with the 14 communities and maybe others that are not specifically part of this initiative, but what is the space that you foresee for the use of technology in this transfer of information and the symmetry of information to foster this culture of resilience? If you see it, yes, of course. Yes, of course. So much relevance in terms of how this data is collected to measure the vulnerability of communities where there is a space of teaching and learning and acknowledging the value of data when we're facing the circumstances of emergency. That is key to create an effective response to forest fires. And if the community has that collected in a way that it can serve as a resource for the mechanisms of civil protection or the different mechanisms involved in the response, it'll be more effective when these events happen. In our experience, technology is reflected in how the community manages. And I would like to emphasize on the design of the risk maps when different elements are analyzed. That information needs to be digitalized as well, and there is where we align with different collaborators, such as CONAF, one of our partners in a project. Under this technical perspective, they add the component of recognizing geography to survey or maybe to see how high temperatures have, the measurements of high temperatures have to be at a certain frequency, or see how we prepare to those. And that is key for how communities create their own alerts. Based on certain projects, several programs are being created with cameras, community cameras, infrared detection of heat to determine where and when the fire is coming. That is a community-based project, and maybe raise in rural sectors, reception is lost, and meteorological receptors. Well, there are communities that are affected by forest fires, and there's one that is working on a project for water resources in the interface through a spraying network. They want to automate those sprayers, and technology is a huge part of that. It's a big part of how they think of the mitigation measures for territories where there's a huge territorial gap and a lack of new technologies, huge gap with what is existing in the market. Now we will zoom out. Thank you, Pedro. I will take some questions. For those of you sending questions through Slido. Might not be saying those literally, but I'm merging your questions to cover the different aspects that you are presenting. But I would like to ask Jose, what measures or advice could you provide in the design and planning of the landscape in the interface urban and forest, facing the population and growth? Well, that is a highly complicated question because you have the phenomenon of population densification, which is highly complex and hard to manage. Not always we are in control of how the population is evolving and how it's displacing, with which we must combine monitoring of how it's evolving with the proactive decisions of territorial design that allow for the establishment of people in low risk areas. And the other aspect is what I was explaining in the beginning of my talk. We have this time scale, which is years, where we have to follow up on the evolution and the different variables that will affect the prevention of a high impact event, and we need to do that tracking and predictively assess risk with these dynamic risk maps, and based on that, there must inevitably be an interaction with the community in order to make them aware of how the evolution of the community will affect risk so that they are active participants in this process. Thank you, Jose. I will continue zooming out, but in these affectation to territories, I will ask Gabriel, with the new institutional nature that 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, Law 3000, 364 brought to us. So what are the main changes that this law brought for us in our work from your perspective as a local government? And if you could share that vision, obviously combining the main topic, technology, and how we can bring that to the well-being or the welfare in territories in the context of forest fires that are becoming more recurring and intense. The disaster risk management around the world seeks to save lives. I would say that is paramount. And from that perspective, local governments through Senapred and this new law uh, gave a new and tremendous opportunity for mayors throughout the country, because there's a new decision of incorporating risk management in municipalities. And what does this mean? I would like to actually extend an invitation to municipalities so that they invest in risk management at a local level, because they are the entities that are closer to people. And if we actually want to save human lives, I believe that the key lies there. We need to start from there. Obviously, there's a government structure, and that's the other important line. This needs to be backed by a legislation that is in line with what we are living, which climate change, and that is what this law is addressing. Hopefully, there will be new guidelines from the government and the legislative branch, and that in line to how we legislate this huge forest masses with preventive silviculture, because the combustible mass that we have in Chile is what causing the problem. And as he kindly put it in his presentation, but there will always be fires, but combustible material or flammable material, not necessarily, and that's where we can advance. And the other thing is to close the risk cycle. That is hard to address at a community or a district level, but we need to start, because usually we have prevention, response, or recovery areas that are separated in municipalities. There are a few municipalities in Chile that have closed the cycle, and that, to me, is one of the challenges that this law is attempting to tackle, and the municipalities and mayors play a key role in this development. Perfect. So this is a call to all of the mayors to carry forward this huge challenge. It is something they're not alone in, and that is part of the goal of Chile Resiliente. all of us are working in this big challenge. But now, following this last round of questions, because time is moving fast, I insist, I'm taking the questions that are being sent through Slido. Christian.
Christian, aside from the psychosocial aspect that we've been talking about that has also been faced through this initiative, is there any way to have the platform include education and prevention? Yes. In principle, this should also incorporate elements because it's also one of the platforms that is the most, it has a higher gamma. So when they're doing this, is that the user is starting to learn more as they use the app more. So since this is science, we have to carry out different and take out different variables to be able to see how this is being evaluated. But this was also one of the first pilots that we did, included this same method. They incorporated elements of education. They incorporated trying to deliver these capsules or elements or tools that allowed the citizens to be more prepared. But it also has to do with profiling, with support, with knowledge of these different territories. So yes, it is considered from the beginning, but we've taken it out just because of it's the pilot and it's the initial evaluation. So yes, there's a potential that already is being acknowledged, which is good news from the science perspective and the people who have to use them adequately in order to be able to make this more robust. So I'm looking at the time. There's not a lot of time left, but I have one question left for Pedro, and then I'm going to finish off with Jose just to close off this panel. Pedro, I already asked you about technology, but I would like to know, in this work, which is more on field than other people's, what challenges do you see, for example, from a point of view of the connectivity, or when we're talking about digital technologies, or even with the learning of technologies? Is there any of this that you've been able to identify on a working level with the communities? And if maybe you could comment a little bit about that. Yes, of course. There are several challenges, and they start from the community experience and also how the communities, through their investment opportunities, have been able to get financed by international organizations, and they allow the construction of certain works that need to be tried out in the certain territories. So this is a very fundamental technology to see how the technology is adapted to different territories where there is a digital gap or where there isn't internet connection, or where also there is the knowledge of what exists on a technological level isn't as specific, because currently on the technology level right now we have the machines that they develop, and we also have the devices, the mobile devices, to be able to communicate. So there's also some other ones that have different elements to be able to work, again, speaking of management. But when we determine the very important condition that this project has given a lot of importance to is to see how we can decide or see where the different starting points of fires are able to be used to be able to have their response protocols for evacuation, and how this is key in communication. So this is how the technology helps out with a very effective way to the vulnerable people. And it's complex because in the territories that we work, there are these vulnerable and older people with reduced communities and transportation, with very complex also mental health disorders. And so technology has to help us adapt to these types of circumstances, which are also individual, because we've spoken about collaborative and territorial community and also local, but we have to think about the person, the human person, and to see how they perceive prevention where there is harmony with nature, but also when there is a exposure to risk. So clearly this is important to see how also we favor technology for these different territories, other than just being able to take down the vegetable or the vegetation around this area. Thank you very much. And to be able to close this panel that's been very important, this is a prologue that's coming for the next panel, where we're going to focus a lot more on the importance of platforms for open data and the integration for improving resilience when faced with forest fires, but not just forest fires, but any kind of threat. So, Jose, maybe if you could comment a little bit from the perspective of your presentation and what we've been able to comment here on the panel is the importance of having different platforms with open data that's integrated and correctly curated to be able to carry this out and make this adoption for technology in the territories is successful. So, as we've been able to see, there is the participation of many groups and many individuals that start from the communities all the way up to the government. And so, there is the necessity of communication amongst them. And the example of the mayors is a very important example because at the end of the day, the role of the mayor is a participant who is very important because he has that direct contact with the community, and at the same time, it has a responsibility to the community. But the mayor himself, as an individual, has to know how he's going to use his own resources, what things he's going to make available to the community, how he's going to be able to organize the community in order for the response time to be the most appropriate and prevention as well. So how is it that the mayor gathers this information that allows him to take the correct decision? What level of training does he need? So throughout this whole process of information transference and decision making, the data is very, very important. And so it has to be accessible as well to all of these different tiers of people who can participate openly and participate as well in the process. So if there isn't an open database that is available and organized in the right way, that will also give you the information that is directed towards responding the answers of each single one of the participants, then at the end of the day, the participants are going to find with incomplete information, limited information, and they're not going to be able to give the correct instructions to the citizen to be able to execute the activities that need to be handled. So without this open data platform, there's no communication. And it's absolutely necessary to organize this in a way that accessibility is adequate for all of the sectors that are going to be benefited from this information. Perfect. Thank you so much, Jose. Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, Cristian and Pedro, for this panel. I hope that you have been able to enjoy as much as I have of all of the things that we were able to share today. And so now I'm going to invite you to a coffee break. I'm not sure if I'm ahead of time, but just to let you know that we are so grateful for your participation here today. You're going to be able to continue to talk with the panelists and the so I'm going to leave the next message up to the next person who is not myself. So first, Catalina, I'm going to allow you to sit here for a minute because we are going to have the group photo of all of the panel that has been adopting new technologies in territories. So yes, I will ask you to stay in your chair just for the group picture of this very interesting panel. And of course, we all can reflect on what we live personally within their space. So also for the other people who are present and for those of you who are also following this technology and this through YouTube, the second speaker was going to give her presentation in English. So for the people on YouTube and also the people who are here, you can get microphones at the reception, headpieces, and also you can find different monitors with the works that have been done for collaborating institutes like iTrend, for as well as panelists in the event. And at the exit of the space, you'll be able to find the people who are a part of iTrend to be able to give you the data applications. We'll be back at 11:30. Thank you. We're also going to ask a picture with everyone standing, please.
Ahora sí, el coffee break. Pueden pasar. No, no hay problema. Trabajo colaborativo.
It was a nice short break to continue talking about what matters. Chile Resiliente, resilient Chile, technologies to anticipate forest fires. In the second part, we'll have a new guest, international guest, Ellen Raji, to present Design Safe, a platform providing us with computational tools to design and analyze critical data for specialized researchers on social natural risks. And this is a project that's part of the Natural Hazard Engineer Research Infrastructure, financed by the National Science Foundation of the United States. Winner of several awards, among which we have the Ralph Beck Award of 2022, academic from Texas University in Austin, and developing research about the understanding and prediction of risk, working at the NS member of the directive board of the National Association of Seismic Activity and the National Committee of Civil Infrastructure of the National Science Foundation of the United States. So after all of that introduction, we invite Ellen Raji to our stage. Thank you, and good morning. That's all my Spanish. Muchas gracias por unírsenos hoy. Tengo que comenzar diciéndoles que no soy una experta en la ingeniería de incendios forestales. Trabajo más con terremotos, pero ambos caen en el dominio de riesgos naturales. Y lo que quiero es presentarles el caso de los datos abiertos para mejorar la resiliencia desde la perspectiva de mi trabajo con Design Safe, la infraestructura para riesgos naturales. Y ahora vamos a comenzar con la palabra resiliencia. Sé que muchas personas sienten, bueno, yo sé que cuando comenzó a surgir me preguntaba qué significaba, qué significa resiliencia. Pueden buscarla, es de hecho una definición bastante simple del Oxford English Dictionary, la capacidad de soportar o recuperarse rápidamente de las dificultades. Puede ser esta flor, entonces simplemente intentando surgir desde la arcilla reseca, desértica, pero ¿cómo nos preparamos ante los desastres? Aquí es donde se vuelve más difícil. Cuando pensamos en los desastres, tenemos todo un ciclo: la preparación, el evento, respuesta, recuperación y reconstrucción. Y ¿cómo nos enfrentamos a esto? Vemos la infraestructura social o la sociedad con el tiempo y estamos allí antes del evento y estamos a un 100%, esperemos que cuando ocurra el evento se vaya a reducir una cantidad pequeña, quizá una significativa, pero con el tiempo, a medida que vamos respondiendo, recuperándonos, esperamos llegar de vuelta a ese 100%, pero a veces no siempre llegamos a ese 100%, a veces incluso mejoramos. Pero esta área bajo la curva, porque soy ingeniera, entonces vamos a ocupar estos términos ingenieriles, vamos a hacer una integración. Es la pérdida de resiliencia en el tiempo. Y lo que estamos haciendo aquí es mejorar la resiliencia. Así es que vamos a cuantificar esto en la mejora o la minimización de esta área bajo la curva. ¿Cómo minimizamos el área bajo la curva? Podemos reducir o vamos a minorar el impacto del evento. Eso es mucha de la preparación de lo que hemos escuchado anteriormente el día de hoy. Y podemos responder más rápidamente, recuperarnos más rápidamente para tener un área de la curva, bajo la curva más pequeña. Ese es el objetivo, pero la pregunta es ¿cómo lograrlo? Me gustaría comenzar con un experimento, una experiencia más bien de mi propia vida. En el sur de California a las 4:30 de la mañana, el 17 de enero del 94. Creo que Juan Carlos sabe a qué día me refiero. Ese fue el día del terremoto de Northridge en California, que fue un evento bastante significativo. Yo me acuerdo porque era una estudiante de posgrado en California, que unos 500 kilómetros. No sentí el evento, pero yo soy de la costa este y mis abuelos estaban mirando la televisión y descubrieron que había un terremoto en California. Eso es todo lo que supieron. Y todo lo que sabíamos de las noticias de los helicópteros que andaban sobrevolando. Bueno, esperaron hasta por lo menos esperaron hasta las 6 de la mañana. Me llamaron y me dijeron, ¿estás bien? Hubo un terremoto. Y yo allí encendí la televisión y me enteré de lo que estaba pasando. Pero no hubo más información, más que de las noticias. Sí, tardaron meses, semanas, meses, incluso años para descubrir la profundidad del número de muertes. 57 muertes, 9.000 lesiones y los miles de millones de dólares en daños. Hace unos años, en 2018, en Anchorage, Alaska, a las 8:30 de la mañana, el 30 de noviembre, hubo otro evento. Este evento de magnitud similar, un poco más grande. Por suerte, bueno, probablemente no escucharon al respecto, pero ahora me llegan notificaciones al teléfono. Yo voy al USGS y la cantidad de datos en tiempo real que están disponibles de cualquier evento de todo el mundo en esta plataforma es sorprendente. Me voy a concentrar solo en un par de aspectos, pero hay todo un mapa interactivo que les muestra los impactos de movimientos sísmicos. Para cualquiera que trabaja en respuesta ante emergencias debería conocer Pager. Incluso en Chile puede encontrar información. Y esa es nunca me acuerdo de la sigla, pero es básicamente Global Earthquake Impact Prompt Assessment. Es una evaluación temprana para la evaluación de terremotos, de impacto de terremotos. Y cuando ocurre algo así, surge el área afectada, tenemos los contornos de el movimiento telúrico, incluso como ingeniera técnica predice los efectos geotécnicos como liquefacción. Existe producto de desplome de movimiento, deslizamiento de tierras. Hay para la gente que responde ante emergencias información en minutos. Bueno, no va a ser un buen puntero pero han estimado la cantidad de fatalidades en el área verde. Eso es bueno, no tenemos un evento que domina las fatalidades, pero a nivel económico, de pérdida económica, está en naranjo. Así es que va a haber algunos impactos económicos. Ahora, si es que vemos el terremoto de Turquía de 2023, era todo en rojo, e inmediatamente sabíamos. Y más allá de eso, cuántas miles de personas sentían diferentes niveles de movimiento telúrico, ciudad por ciudad por ciudad, te indicaba cuántas personas estaban afectadas. Vemos la densidad de población aquí. Todos esos datos están integrados casi inmediatamente para poder responder de manera apropiada. Entonces, esto lo robé de la charla de Joyner hace un par de años de Walt Joyner. Y aquí, como el terremoto que experimenté en el 94, hemos llevado a todos estos productos y lo que son modelos impulsados por datos y las colaboraciones multidisciplinarias. Esto es, necesitamos sismología para entender el movimiento telúrico, necesitamos la ingeniería para comprender el daño y la ciencia social para comprender las pérdidas, y esperamos en el futuro añadir la recuperación, que involucraría la ingeniería y las ciencias sociales trabajando conjuntamente. Es interesante ver cómo la disponibilidad de datos permite que se desarrollen modelos que sirvan para todas estas disciplinas que ayuden a responder mejor. Entonces, con esto como base, propongo el uso de Open Data, de datos de acceso abierto, que aceleren los descubrimientos de investigación. Ni siquiera tenemos que mirar tanto hacia atrás para darnos cuenta de que lo más significativo que ocurrió alrededor del mundo fue cuando vimos a los datos abiertos tener un impacto. Fue para el COVID-19, cuando aceleró la investigación para el COVID, para el desarrollo de las vacunas y toda la ciencia detrás de eso, hasta la comprensión de cómo los casos estaban brotando, dónde había vacunas, dónde se estaban entregando a las comunidades. Los datos jugaron un rol clave y esto ocurrió de una manera muy rápida. ¿Cómo podemos tomar esto y llevarlo a nuestra comunidad para poder hacer una diferencia similar? Una oportunidad es mediante Design Safe, que es la ciberinfraestructura para los riesgos naturales. Tenemos componentes múltiples, pero uno muy grande es el uso de datos. Tenemos acá el depósito o repositorio de datos en donde las personas publican datos de investigación que otros investigadores y no investigadores pueden ocupar. También tenemos un portal que es otra forma de acceder a datos, que es un portal de reconocimiento. Por ejemplo, un guardia de un parque que quiere estar alerta a los incendios forestales, quieren intentar comprender los impactos. Todos esos datos están allí, no solamente para los que recopilan los datos, sino para que los otros puedan ocuparlos de cara al futuro. Vemos otras oportunidades también para permitir la simulación y la analítica de datos ocupando computadoras de alto rendimiento en nuestro centro avanzado de informática. También necesitamos usuarios entrenados, calificados, que también tenemos. Pero me quiero concentrar más en los datos. ¿Cómo luce nuestro almacenamiento de datos? Así luce nuestra bodega de datos Design Safe. Tenemos espacio privado y público en donde residen los datos públicos. Acá se puede crear un proyecto para todos los miembros del equipo, todos los miembros están acá, se decide publicar, hay que hacer un poco de trabajo, de curatoría, digamos, y luego pasa a la sección o al ámbito de estudios publicados. Cuando está listo el proyecto, se publica. ¿Pero qué significa el publicar datos? Siempre me gusta ocupar este gráfico, esta imagen, porque aprendimos esto en el kinder, ¿verdad? El compartir es cuidar, pero como científica, el compartir datos para mí es cuidar, es preocuparse. Pero ¿qué tenemos que hacer para hacerlo de manera efectiva, eficaz? Que estas capturas de mi propia cuenta de la universidad, y son solo unas carpetas, pero no recuerdo cuáles son algunas de esos archivos. Pero lo que tengo que hacer es organizar. Este no es mi closet. Este creo que es del de Macarena. Se parece al de Macarena.
Entonces, cuando esto es lo que es un set de datos publicado, esto yo estaba muy preocupado sobre contar chistes, porque cuando la gente está utilizando los auriculares, algunos tienen peor tiempo, pero es eso, o a lo mejor mis chistes están mejor que antes. Bueno, entonces, ¿cómo se ve esto? Parece una hoja. Aquí hay datos experimentales geotécnicos. Mientras sigues para abajo, no ves los datos hasta que nosotros te decimos cómo ver de dónde vienen los datos. Si alguna vez has trabajado con un académico, los académicos a todos les encantan las publicaciones y poder ver de dónde vienen los documentos. Tenemos que estar acreditados de cierta manera, entonces queremos hacer que la gente entienda cómo hacer estas situaciones cuando están utilizando los datos de los demás. Y también estamos buscando cuántas descargas se hacen, etcétera. Ahí está nuestro DOY. Esto es una manera ejemplar de poder hacer el tracking de datos digitales. Y mientras uno va bajando, aquí tenemos una representación visual de la organización estructural y también los datos y los archivos. Entonces aquí tenemos todos los datos disponibles para los investigadores para que puedan organizar, etiquetar y después eventualmente publicar. Cuando uno ya tiene estos datos publicados, puedes ir al lugar público, puedes ir con el dedo Y directamente a él. Yo hice una búsqueda y tenemos varios sets de datos. Y cuando estaba en mi oficina, quería ver si es que a lo mejor teníamos algunos datos de Chile. Entonces ahí escuché sobre el profesor Gonzalo Montabla de la Universidad de Concepción, que estaba publicando distintos datos de liquefacción. Entonces, aunque hay muchas plataformas de datos, nosotros en Design Safe está disponible para la comunidad de riesgos globales naturales. Entonces ya sé que esto existe no solamente en Chile, pero para otros lugares también. También es importante para nosotros tener esta comunidad que esté aquí, sean parte de los datos. Entonces, bueno, aquí hay dos ejemplos, aquí la historia de dos terremotos. Esto viene de un lugar un poco más científico, una perspectiva más científica, en vez de la respuesta. Esta soy yo en 1999, te puedes dar cuenta que estoy bastante más flaca y que eso eran unas botas muy, muy bonitas que tenía puestas en ese momento. Pero el Coachella, terremoto de Coachella, hubo muchos daños en la ciudad de Adapazari. Entonces ahí el edificio se puede ver que está puesto en un lado, en un ángulo. Y así quedó tras el terremoto. Nosotros pudimos colectar muchos datos, fuimos edificio por edificio y vimos los daños estructurales, las personas volvieron, vieron las condiciones subterráneas y había muchas investigaciones que se utilizaron y si es que podría haber hecho alguna búsqueda, hubieron más de 500 papeles que se pudieron encontrar con la licuefacción y Adapazari. Entonces, un poco más de 10 años después, tenemos otro sismo significante que pasó en Nueva Zelanda. Se pueden ver que hay muchos daños y que recolectaron muchos datos. Entonces, se pudo ver cuáles fueron las fallas de tierra durante toda la ciudad. 30.000 pruebas de copenetración que se ponen para abajo en la tierra para poder ver cuáles son los daños. Entonces aquí inventaron la base geotécnica de Nueva Zelanda y esto fue hecho público para toda la comunidad geotécnica. Entonces mi búsqueda no científica es que fui a Google Scholar y busqué 10 años después del evento y busqué liquefaction y Christchurch, que fue la ciudad, y después de esto estábamos publicando más datos, entonces va a ser un poco más de datos, pero ¿cuánto más? Piensen, ¿cuánto van a adivinar? 600, 700, 7 millones, 6.260, o sea, más de 10 veces lo que había ido con el otro terremoto. Entonces no tuve que tratar de hacer unas investigaciones, pero aquí vamos a decir que yo digo que la representación de esto es por la disponibilidad de datos. No es que uno tuvo que ir a Christchurch para poder ir a ver lo que pasó, uno solo necesitaba acceso a la base de datos. Otro lugar a donde nosotros estamos viendo para los datos de Christchurch en específico es cómo podríamos empezar a balancear la inteligencia artificial y el conocimiento de las máquinas. Lo que nos damos cuenta es cuántos datos se necesitan para la inteligencia artificial y el conocimiento de máquinas. Entonces aquí uno puede ver cómo se puede ver los desempeños de la información artificial. Entonces aquí uno puede ver los autos que se manejan solo y a lo mejor tienen, no sé, de 204 petabytes a 100 terabytes. Y ahora ChatGPT fueron basados en 30 millones de palabras, 1.000 millones de palabras. Y solo un estudio es poco probable que genere los suficientes datos para poder balancear lo que podemos hacer con la inteligencia artificial y con el conocimiento de máquinas. Pero cuando empezamos a buscar distintas o juntar distintos datos, podemos acercarnos un poco más. Aquí viene un ejemplo de STEER y esto en la época de huracanes del 2017 al 2019, la cantidad de datos que se ha recolectado son miles de estructuras, de análisis de estructuras se han hecho, distintos datos que son de las UAV. Aquí también tienen luces con radar y también se puede empezar a ver panorámicos desde el piso. Entonces uno básicamente lo que hace es manejar y se puede hacer imágenes de todo esto. 400 kilómetros de esta pista. Ahora se puede tener datos significativos para poder enseñar de inteligencia artificial. Se hacen en Design Safe para que se puedan utilizar por otros investigadores. Entonces ahora, ¿cómo uno hace que estos datos quieran que cuenten sus datos? Entonces yo voy a decir de que hay que poner todos estos datos en distintas plataformas. Design Safe solamente se enfoca en un dominio técnico, pero tal vez has escuchado de algunas otras más: Zenodo, Dataverse, Figshare, Dryad, GitHub y cualquier otro que incluyen. Todas estas opciones son incluidas y son viables. No solo los datos, pero si tú puedes utilizar las visualizaciones, mejores descripciones, todo eso va a ayudar a que otra persona pueda utilizar tus datos. Tenemos que tener una locación que sea permanente. Entonces, tiene que ser DOI, no solo URL. Por ejemplo, donde yo busqué Atapasari, ya no existen. Todas las páginas ya no funcionan. Entonces, si es que lo que hace el DOI es poder llevarte a otro lugar donde exista la información. Y esto también hace que las personas se entrenen a citar estas publicaciones. Te damos el lenguaje, pero ¿a dónde va? Entonces yo lo he visto al poner un DOI en las conclusiones, en los reconocimientos. Entonces es mucho más fácil hacer la lista de referencia. Entonces esto es de uno de mis papeles, donde uno puede ver que este es el texto que parece solamente una citación, papel normal, y en las referencias ahí está Design Safe, DOI, y ahí puedo hacer un tracking más fácil para poder ver que este documento ha sido citado. Entonces, déjame hablar de cómo está funcionando y quiénes usan Design Safe. Ahora estamos más o menos 7 años y ahora hay más de 11.100. Entonces, hay algunos que están relacionados con terremotos, otros con vientos y otros 300 que están representados con otro tipo de catástrofe. Así que estamos viendo un buen crecimiento con la app. También queríamos ver qué tan seguido nuestros datos se están utilizando y bajando y cuántos archivos se están bajando. Entonces vimos un grupo más pequeño de 80 distintos descargas y veamos qué tan rápido o qué tan seguido desde los últimos 12 meses se actualizan estos datos. Entonces aquí hay una tabla de cuántas bajadas se pueden bajar y cuántos datos se están bajando. Entonces aquí la mayoría de los datos son utilizados de 10 a 20 veces dentro de 12 meses, pero aquí tenemos otros que son entre 100 o 120 y algunos de estos son muy únicos. Habían algunos investigadores que hicieron unas simulaciones de nosotros ni siquiera sabíamos que estaban utilizando esto. En The New York Times salió que Data Safe lo encontraron por el periódico y ahí la gente supo que se podía utilizar a través de Design Safe. Siempre estamos buscando los sitios de nuestro curador. Ella tiene una alerta en Google para poder hacer estas cosas con las citaciones, pero los investigadores no hacen las cosas bien, especialmente en este sentido. Entonces, estas cosas van creciendo y además de la mitad de este año ya llevamos más de la mitad de lo que hicimos el año pasado, en el 2022, pero utilicemos inteligencia artificial. Entonces, la dimensión en que se utiliza es un recurso que se utiliza online donde uno puede ver las distintas citaciones. Entonces, si yo simplemente hago una pregunta o consulta en Design Safe, yo puedo ver los datos que ellos están mostrando. Entonces, no son solamente citaciones de datos, pero dice que también Design Safe puede publicar o que están utilizando las citaciones, están saliendo. Entonces, ahora en los últimos años podríamos haber visto que eran 225 y ahora son más de eso en la mitad del 2023. Y ahora podemos ver el impacto de cuántas publicaciones están citando estas publicaciones. Entonces estamos buscando como más en el macro y estamos utilizando ya miles que se usan en un año. Así que estamos también muy felices de poder ver este crecimiento. Entonces, ¿cómo hacemos que las personas hagan esto? ¿Es la zanahoria o el palo? hay un lado para la época de los palos o durante esta parte de los palos. Hay que obligar a los investigadores a hacer esto. Las agencias que ayudan a estar, también los documentos o las revistas que pueden recibir datos que apoyan, pero por lo general la zanahoria funciona mejor que el palo. Entonces, hacer que sea más fácil, si es que uno baja los estándares, entonces eso va a tener a las personas que estén dispuestas a publicar sus datos. Pero si es que uno pone la barra demasiado bajo, entonces puede ser inutilizable por otras personas. Siempre tiene que haber un equilibrio aquí. Hay que poder proveer las herramientas y los recursos, también darle crédito a los investigadores y proveer incentivos. Es un título, pero en verdad es como una frase, es como el abstracto de un título. Los beneficios percibidos de datos abiertos están mejorando, pero los científicos siguen a falta de los recursos, las habilidades y las recompensas. Entonces esto se demoró más o menos 10 años en ver cómo está evolucionando. Esto viene una evolución positiva, pero también hay algunos impedimentos. Entonces, cuando encontré esa publicación, que fue algo que hice la última semana, es muy bien que vemos las cosas que se están publicando en Design Safe. En los Estados Unidos, no solamente se utiliza la Fundación Nacional de Ciencias, sino que el año pasado el gobierno de Estados Unidos dijeron que todos los datos de las cosas que están de la investigación que es del gobierno, tienes que poder pagarlo, que muchas veces se tiene que pagar. Entonces Design Safe se utiliza solo para bajar datos de manera gratuita. Entonces ya desde una perspectiva más egoísta, yo creo que publicar tus datos promueve la visibilidad y el impacto de lo que tú estás haciendo en tu investigación. También mantiene la continuidad a través de los miembros del proyecto y también de los estudios de doctorado, y yo le pido que utilicen estas cosas. No pueden encontrar los datos porque los alumnos antiguos no lo dejaron y no están contestando los mails. Entonces eso también nos ayuda con la continuidad. También hemos podido desarrollar las herramientas de nuestros curadores de datos, porque también somos específicos con el dominio. La, los datos de las ciencias sociales y de los datos de ingeniería, los dos están dispuestos para poder entender cómo funcionan y cómo se impacta el lado social por la parte científica. Y aquí también tenemos unos bastantes premios del Design Safe Dataset que se hacen todos los años para poder reutilizar los impactos que tienen estas cosas. Entonces, para poder cerrar esto, el caso para los datos abiertos, espero de que uno pueda ir desde el paradigma antiguo, que en verdad era este. Uno genera datos por algunas investigaciones, lo analizas y después lo publicas en un reporte, y después eso se utilizaba, antes era un disco y a lo mejor ahora está en una caja, pero bueno, no está bien organizado, vas a tener mucha dificultad utilizándolo. Entonces ahora lo que se hace, hay que generar los datos y publicar los datos, como también publicar tu reporte. Entonces a lo mejor hay varias personas que están haciendo lo mismo, pero hay una brecha, hay un lugar donde no hay datos. Entonces voy a generar nuevos datos y voy a publicar y analizar los datos extras y después publicarlos, y también el reporte. Y es a través de este mecanismo que nosotros podemos crecer y ampliar nuestro conocimiento para poder hacer estos descubrimientos más significativos. Muchísimas gracias. Por favor, thank you, Ellen, for being with us. Thank you so much for your speech. A ver, quédate conmigo un segundito porque tenemos que esperar un segundo. Pero tengo una pregunta para ti. ¿Cuál crees que es el desafío básico que tenemos que enfrentar para tener acceso a a estos what's the that we need to be able to face to access this enormous amount of data.
I have the mic. I think there are two.
Creo que existen dos. Entonces, dentro del rango de investigaciones hay un lugar para datos, pero después cuando estos descubrimientos se están haciendo y queremos proveer la mayor cantidad de datos útiles para poder entregársela a los que toman decisiones, muchas veces hay una brecha. Entonces, esa brecha se tiene que llenar con investigadores que son aplicados y puedan tomar estos datos asociados y poder destilarlo para la información que se requiere o que están buscando estas agencias públicas. Entonces ahí es cuando se tiene que distinguir la diferencia entre datos e información. La data se puede desarrollar para poder hacer la investigación que se necesitan para tomar estas decisiones. Por favor, manténgase aquí con nosotros. Puedes utilizar la silla que tú quieras. And in the meantime, in order to prepare our panel that is going to continue, which is open data for resilience and importance of a unified platform, to be able to present the people who are in this panel. So we're going to invite Paula Aguirre. She is from the Catholic University of Chile, from the Natural Artificial Intelligence, and Paula has been working through her expos to be able to evaluate the role and the danger with national disasters like earthquakes and fires, and also in urban areas using a combination of remote perception, geospatial analysis, data science, and the learning of machine learning coordinated with physics. Thank you, Paula, for being with us today. We're also going to invite Jorge Saavedra. He is the chief of the Department of Development Investigation from CONAF and against fire. He is a forest engineer, and he is a specialist in teledetection, and he has more than 15 years linked to fire management and the analysis and planning, the use of geotechnologies, and the evaluation and analysis of risk, amongst other areas, and he's also an academic from the University Mayor. The next person we're going to present is Rodrigo Mahaluf. He is an investigator or a researcher from the University of Chile. He's an industrial engineer. Please step up, Rodrigo, and he has dedicated his career to the development of tools for advanced analytics and the management for forest fire-resistant vegetation. So here he's also leading investigators or researchers from complex searches in the FireRest European group. Thank you very much for being here. And then still today, we have Hugh Safford. He is a Vibrant Planets executive, and he is also a ecological professor in UC Davis. He was here for the USDA. His research includes the adaptability of the fires and Mediterranean fires, amongst others. And currently, he is a chief scientist of Vibrant Planets and in the project denominated Land Tender. This is going to be an interface of research and technology for technological issues in the forestry resilience and fire mitigation.
We welcome Macarena Perez, Director of E-Trans Relationships, expert on human and environmental settlements from the Pontifical Catholic University, besides a teacher. Professor at that House of Studies has published several times and was the Executive Secretary of the National System of Coordination of Territorial Management, SNIT Chile. Thank you so much, Macarena. She will be the coordinator of this panel, data and key information for resilience. Thank you, Pascal. Thanks, everyone, and the panel members. I am lucky enough to moderate this panel that is so interesting. If it were up to me, we would be talking for 3 hours, but we only have 40 minutes, so I'll do my best. I would like to start based on Ellen's presentation. I'll start by asking the first question to the CONAF representative, Jorge. We know, indeed, there is a complex time coming. As we discussed in the panel, one of the main challenges is related to the integration of these technologies. The first question is then how and what is what CONAF is doing in particular. This is a very recurrent question, I know. I'm fully aware of it. How is CONAF incorporating this technology and information and data for the upcoming seasons? Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. CONAF has several data platforms since all of the services have improved over time. Well, it was a very scattered platform, and now we're trying to unify. We have different platforms that are raising the level of prevention. As the Caritas person mentioned, we are doing georeferencing, which was missing in the past, and at the same time, we're preparing for responses. We're preparing our own indexes of risk, threat. We are creating our own warnings, such as the United States, but we're doing it here with codes from Google Engine that we're doing on our own. We're creating our maps. I believe that the public services have focused on promoting professionals that already have certain level of expertise and graduate studies that can use their own tools. I believe that's a good link to the academia world, but always creating information and more applied data. Besides the indexes that we have, we simulate fires at an operational level, and we conduct analysis to establish what the priorities are at a tactical level, a strategic level of what can happen with a fire. That is in the response terms, but it's analysis that can be taken to prevention when defining strategic points of management throughout the territory, basing on what the previous fires have caused, which is fundamental, and obviously according to what happens in the different territories. So there is a lot of information available and much data that we're trying to share always with everyone. With iTrend, we're sharing data too, but what's important is to receive data as well. We want to receive data from other institutions. I believe that the presentation was key. That is the path that we need. Data. We need a common language, and I think it's a proper path. Thank you, Jorge. One of the reasons why in this panel we've chosen not only CONAF as a participant, but the Institute of Complex Systems is because of an initiative that we've had to work with this year and work closely promoted by the European Union, but in Chile is precisely being run by the University of Chile. One of the main goals, and I will give the floor to Rodrigo for him to tell us about it, is about knowing the relationship between the public sphere and the research initiatives beyond the academic world. We understand that today we've seen plenty of challenges. This is just one of the topics, but I will give you the microphone so you can tell us what the project is about and what Chile is doing about it. Thank you, Macarena. Thank you, iTrend, for organizing this instance. FireRes is a project that aims to support the transition to landscapes and communities and territories that are more resilient. In the European Union, and particularly in Chile, Chile is the only country that is participating in this project outside of it. And this project, what it seeks and how does it seek to do this transition through the implementation, testing, and scaling of technology solutions, both at the software level, data software level, and social organization and living labs. And in Chile, the living lab that we've worked with along with CONAF and CORMA is in the region of Bio Bio. What is the, the interesting part about these living labs is that we are considering real scenarios for the initiatives that are analyzed in this project, but also the fundamental actors, the local real actors that are part of the management of forest fires in Chile. Actually, we held an event in April this year where we brought together different stakeholders in the region of Biobío, and one of the main problems that was raised was the lack of coordination and lack of availability and consistency among the data that everyone had available when creating alerts for the different organizations. And one of the needs that was seen from the territory, from the region, at a national level too, was to unify the data, unify the criteria of management, both for the prevention and for responding to and afterwards recovering to forest fires. We will address some of the points that you've mentioned in the other run, but I will now like to give the floor to Mr. Aguirre from Sijiden to tell us specifically what they're working about in terms of fires. Thank you, Macarena. Thank you for the invitation. I'm a senior researcher at Sijiden, integrated research in the risk of disasters, and I think in this combination are finding it value to model and prevent fires of great magnitude. And in both places, there are several initiatives that are collaborating. I believe that they're all aiming to what Jose was talking about this morning, understanding and improving the trajectory, the path of fires. From Senya, there's an initiative that is being formulated together with CONAF of using artificial intelligence in combination with data and imaging from surveillance cameras that CONAF has implemented to early detect the onset of fires through algorithms allowing us to detect fire columns or smoke columns or other signals that allow us to quickly detect where the fire can be starting and control it promptly. There are technologies of early perception allowing us to detect focus or areas of fires, not only with the recurrence that would be ideal for the Chilean territory, probably they're more focused on other areas of the planet, and in our case would be very useful to complement it with the imaging that could be obtained in real time. Not afterwards, we're moving to the second part of the path, that is the fire propagation. And we have another idea that is a little more exploratory because after early detection, we have artificial intelligence technologies that have been very proven. But as for the development of the fire prevention models, there's what Jose was telling about this morning, the models that are allowing us to understand what this phenomenon is advancing. Like there are physical models that are more complex and difficult to solve computationally, so in real time they're not feasible to use. But the idea is that by using artificial intelligence and data assimilation, we can accelerate or manage to have a hybrid technology to have quicker simulations and precisely like since data is more scarce, not as abundant as we have in other areas of artificial intelligence, the idea is that those artificial intelligence algorithms are precisely reported by physics. The neuronal networks are given by data, but also the architecture and the training on those neural networks, we can incorporate what we know about the physical models, so we can add in equations to those networks so that the learning is more efficient and it can learn based on data that is restricted. That is on one hand, and what Senya is doing, and on the other side is what fires are doing. And recently from Sijiden, we are completing work that is much more interdisciplinary with the urbanism model, with Constanza Gonzalez, who are architects, urbanist experts, and people with expertise in prevention, with fire prevention. What we did was to address a scale that is much more detailed and local, what the damage is happening locally and rurally, to analyze what the parameters are for the structures, the set of structures to measure probability to suffer losses. And there's interesting work to raise data with drones, to have solutions, and to collect all of that information about the damages that dies quickly. And the other part is to take all of that information that we have on prevention for fires and threat prevention. From Sijiden, we are promoting a SIG project in Valparaiso to create platforms and tools of information that are useful for local governments and communities so that this information is ultimately put into practice.
Thank you, Paula. I know that it's a lot of information and it's very, very complex to just be able to summarize it in such little time, but I'm going to invite you to be able to see all of the social media as well as the website for the event, and we're going to be able to detail the projects that are being mentioned right now in order to be able to visualize these products and maybe in some collaboration or an opportunity to be able to collaborate this year as we were carrying out in the Ministry of Science, as the subsecretary had mentioned. And so here we can actually see that while we're doing these workshops in regions, in different regions, and being able to connect, we were able to advance much faster. So I think that this is something that's a lot more evident, but it doesn't always occur. So I'm going to ask you to go review these projects. Everybody is you're going to be able to find them anywhere. They're absolutely identifiable. So it's also available if there are any more questions. So in the meantime, I'm going to start talking about also the questions that are coming in from Slido. I'm going to ask you to make your questions through that platform. And I'm also going to give Hugh the word to be able to, we had the opportunity to meet each other with the projects that he's doing in the Austral University. We know that you're collaborating, but specifically, could you tell us about the platform specifically, since we're going to talk about this in the next few couple of questions, what it's about, what the project is about that you're the leader of, and which ones do you think would be the elements that would make it different? I talked very slowly because I know that people here speak very, very quickly, and I know that you understand, but this is going to be very difficult. So we are chasing the same animal. So I come from the United States, where it's very easy for us as well. We work together a lot.
La plataforma que Landtender es un clásico plataforma de apoyo a la toma de decisiones, desarrollado por Vibrant Planet para ayudar a la gente, a grupos colaborativos, a agencias, a ONGs, para desarrollar planes de mitigación, ¿no? A riesgo de incendio forestales, pero también riesgo de sequía, y vamos a estar agregando inundaciones también en el año que viene. La plataforma permite fácil acceso a un conjunto enorme de datos, también evaluación de riesgo de incendios de alto nivel, también priorización y programación de acciones de gestión, de reducción de riesgo al mismo tiempo. Y la herramienta calcula también un retorno de inversión, más o menos, a varios escenarios de acciones de reducción, y al mismo tiempo permite a las partes interesadas, a los stakeholders,
That allows the stakeholders to be able to create their own scenarios based on the ponderations or of their priorities for the project areas. This could include biodiversity, water, carbon, protection of assets. So as a result, these always come out as maps, comparisons between the scenarios, between cost, recommended methods for risk reduction, economic exit strategies, ecosystem strategies, and well, it's very easy to be able to use, and based on, and so this works in real time, and it makes it easier to deduct from months to years these planning processes that are normal, and at the same time is also very viable. It's the best. So that's it. Thank you. We're going to keep asking more questions just to go more in detail. But okay, so starting from the presentation that Ellen gave, which specifically explained to us this concept of open data, and understand that in Chile, it's a struggle that we have been trying to deal with for a long time. And a lot of us, I think, have participated in different areas within different roles that we have in this topic. But what would you say today, starting from academia, and this also goes to Rodrigo and Paula, starting from the public sector? I'm going to put Jorge in a tight spot later, but what are the challenges? What are we missing? What are we lacking for this information to be available? I know that it's a very complex question, so just think about it for a couple of seconds. I don't know who wants to respond first. Pao, maybe? It's a very complex challenge. There have also been advances. So, for example, the investigation that we're doing now with the propagation of fires, everything that is said with their starting points that are very positive. The challenge, I believe, is that they can be able to share data that have been generated in very specific labs, or not always by the researchers, but also through other organizations as well. So, as an anecdote, something that happened to us with the study of urban viability, where we found the last fires that have been. The one that was from Viña del Mar, we had our methodology, which was based on small drones that weren't working for that event in particular, because there was smoke and there were planes, and so it was just by coincidence that I was on field with a Ministry of Public Works group. And so just because of the interaction that we had, and our researcher was able to speak to them, and there was willingness from both parties, and so we were able to use this very quickly, they were able to share data, and that allows us to close the report. So I think that also it does have to do with where the data might be, because sometimes they're in places that you wouldn't imagine, or in organizations that, like the Ministry of Public Works, it's not their area of study particularly, but they have data that's very valuable, and sometimes if they have the goodwill of being able to share it, they can also have it. But also being able to make this mapping, that it's very difficult to do, and it happens or it doesn't occur sometimes, because there are casual reasons why this doesn't happen. You think it's systematic. The amount of information that could be used is impressive. Rodrigo, what do you think? I would just like to add two things separately. The first one is that in order to share data, first, there is a lot of data that we don't have today, particularly with gas, and the data that we can to be able to model these different fire situations. We're starting from the different data from CONAF, which is coming in a lot from 2014, and so in this sense, it's not current, and we don't have information about the topology of the different fuels. We don't know where the fire starts, or the width of the canopies of the trees, and so here we have to make a very important. We have to have a different kind of technology where we have different leaderships, and in Spain, for example, it's just one example in Europe. So on the other hand, there's also the topic of, for the same types of data, or for climate data, for example, there are different sources in Chile. So they aren't being put into consideration with the same formats. So this is when you have to have, it's like having two different clocks. When you have one clock, you know exactly what time it is, but when you have two clocks, then you're kind of left with this uncertainty. And so I think that in order to do this, to be able to generate the data that's missing, and to be able to unify the data that is being used in different sources, we can also facilitate all of this to be shared. And the most important part is about talking between different actors. And thanks to the severe fires that we've had through 2017 to 2023, these conversations are starting to happen. So this is a space where I believe and also because of the platform that we have for data, iTrend, there's going to be this unification process of all the data, and it's going to be a combined effort to make this work. Thank you very much. Jorge, you mentioned that in one way or another has also been mentioned on the research part in academia. It's the work with communities. I know that you, as CONAF, work directly with some of these institutions in Spain or Portugal, for example, who are directly related to the topics of fires, but also the works that you do with communities. So we saw it in the first panel as well, is how to transform this data, how to transform, how do you see this challenge? Yes, it's a lot of work to do. Sometimes you say that you have a threat and you don't know how many threats or how many houses there are. So if I can get a hand of all of these data, then I could say that collectively there's going to be 35 houses that are in threat. There's a lot of data that isn't there. And there's also data from the census in 2017 and also in rural areas or rural infrastructure, which is very important. But also it's very, you need to be able to have a figure for the organization, but it's not that figure because it was a later update. But I think that this is something that is very difficult to have. All of this information is difficult to have, and it is very good what's going on, prioritizing areas that are obviously more sensitive and that are more vulnerable. But this is already a huge step forward. So regarding the other question, I think that you have to collaborate and work together. It's the only way to get through this. So we have data, but we also have data that academia doesn't have and they haven't calculated. So I think that sometimes it's nothing has to look over their shoulder. You need to work together. So as Rodrigo said, we had an extreme event and we were able to say that between 21 and 23 hours of that day, 3 in Nacimiento, it was measured out in a different system. So we went into the fire, and then we saw that between 9 and 9:30, it was going at 530 meters per second. So it could have been people. It could have been. There's just things that are clearly. I'm very honest, and there are things that aren't. You can't simulate them. So it generates this downdraft or interacts with the environment. You can't consider this. There's nothing that can give you the data. So you can also try to send weather balloons and trying to see what the difference is in different temperatures, but when it's going to fall, where it's going to fall, but we don't know. So it could be right on this side or a little bit more generated, kind of like a fan of extreme events. And this is also why sometimes you can continue to work together and with the technologies that are already available and the ones that are being developed as well. But we do have to have this alert that Jose tells us, where we've been saying for a long time, there's fires that you can't be simulated, especially the ones that have to do with the atmosphere, like the one in Santa Ana or the one from Quillota, Mutaco, etc. So this is also very important just to highlight. Great, thank you. Are there any concepts? There are some concepts that I feel are kind of recurrent, and I think that this is great that this actually happens, especially from the planning perspective and also the ecology. I think that the platform that you're using to be able to use, you guys work with this more macro concept for territory as a whole, and that's composed by different elements, as you mentioned here earlier. So how would you see the challenge of incorporating these types of concepts into public policies and also with the availability of information and data in order to be able to make better projections or plan it better? This is an interesting question. The answer is that there is a scale economy, right, for everything, economically, ecologically, everything. So we are facing a world crisis, and then to be able to face fires that don't belong to a certain jurisdiction or internationally or anything. So this is where you have to think about great passages. So this implies a group of collaborators with many ideas and a lot of input from a lot of different people. So here we're able to, well, one thing that I believe is going to come or result positively is artificial intelligence. So its ability to be able to work with different problems that are very complex and be able to help us resolve in the amount of time that it has. It's unbelievable, but But with this type of information and with AI that has been used everywhere in the world and more every day, is that this change, this very fast change in technology, leaves the world, it leaves common people behind. So there's also, at the same time, you need to be able to use these new models and new technologies in tools and the way that you think about things. And so this is how we need to be able to create in these models and within these products and create interfaces for people that aren't specialized. And so in my lab, we're thinking a lot about how to do this because really it generates even more distrust. Look at what's going on in the world. So this wave of mistrust and information. So there are people who actually need to manipulate the data and see at the same time, on the same table, what's going on. So it is a great challenge. Thank you very much, Hugh. Ellen, you have interpretation, correct? Is everything okay? Quería hablar un poco sobre tu presentación. Mencionaste algo sobre cómo podemos convencer a los investigadores para poder mantener estos datos. ¿Cuál es tu idea sobre esto? ¿Qué opinas? ¿Qué podemos hacer? ¿Algunas ideas para el futuro a lo mejor que puedas compartir con nosotros y podemos empezar a trabajar inmediatamente? Llevamos harto rato en esto y la verdad es que es un obstáculo. Los investigadores sienten que son los dueños de sus datos y uno necesita poder venir o llegar a ellos a través de la perspectiva de tener un impacto de más alto rango en la idea mundial. Yo veo que las generaciones más jóvenes son más abiertos a la ciencia abierta y a los datos abiertos, así que estoy muy optimista sobre los datos al futuro y estamos tratando con los investigadores actuales, le estamos dando todos los incentivos, pero yo honestamente opino que se va a demorar tiempo y vamos a ver qué pasa con la evolución de los investigadores más jóvenes. Me encantaría tener una respuesta mágica para poder hacer que los investigadores puedan compartir, pero bueno, podemos esperar. Same question for the three of you. How do you think that you could actually get incentivated by sharing this information? I'm going to start off with Rodrigo. He's a researcher, so he's going to go straight for the question. So as I mentioned before, I feel that one of the main ways to be able to incentivate and share data is to be able to create a community that with people that come from different sectors and where they are able to, or the researchers are able to see where there is a space for collaboration and to generate an impact. And I feel that in order to do this, it's also very, very important and to be able to include civil society. So, for example, the community prevention networks, and they're the ones who are actually suffering with these issues in their own lives and in their own homes and also in their own territories. And so I believe that when somebody finds or runs into these people who are suffering with these issues on a first basis, there is also something inside of you as a researcher that makes you feel the need to be able to collaborate and also to be able to generate real impacts in a very urgent level in the space for the forest fire issues. So by creating a community of the involved actors, they need to be able to get together and they need to be able to discuss and think in a very recurrent and frequent time, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. So again, I feel that this is a space that is it's pioneering and pointing in this direction, but also it is necessary for this to be done consistently and also hopefully within those same territories, because we make all of these policies usually from Santiago, and here in Santiago we're not affected that much by the fires. So we do have to do these things in person in Bio Bio, in Ñuble, etc. Well, that's an invitation for us as well to be able to organize more activities together. Paula, what do you believe? I am an optimist. I do believe that there is a current or a trend that people, especially from the science, data, and AI, that's all going forward a little bit, and the codes have been opened. So I believe that the fact that the codes are more open obligates or makes it difficult for the data to not be open, because if I just wanted to show up and use a tool that's already been developed, then this is when I can realize that the data needs to be there. But I also believe that there is some kind of positive perspective. I think the universities as well need to be able to help from a perspective, because there's open science projects that are trying to be more globally involved, and also helping for the academia to be able to start and make this culture prevalent for open data, open journals, open science, and so it's more discussable. You don't have to be able to pay to access or publish an article, and so I think that this is also being propagated more and more towards data, and that all of the different actors try to push towards this direction, so that there's something that's more normal.
Thank you, Jorge. What do you think? I believe this coordination between members of the academia and practitioners is key. I think the link between firefighters and forest experts is it's key. When people from science world see that their science is being applied, they will feel that it makes much more sense. I think that well, I've published. I don't publish that much, but I think that just publishing for the sake of it doesn't make any sense either. Just having three fonts and the same fonts aiming to fire propagation doesn't make sense either. If there's one font, well, let's not be redundant. That's what I mean. Let's just improve an existing model. But how do I reach that model to improve it? I think that is where collaboration, your collaboration, becomes paramount to merge, to join the academia with the different technical areas. There was the promotion model. Maybe we need to fine tune this model, and it becomes a collaboration. It's not a new thing entirely, but this model didn't have so many bad things. Maybe just needed some inputs or no research, and the model improves. In the end, you will always have to clean the bad parts and add some more good information. I think that's the best. Thank you. What do you think are the incentives to share information through open platforms? Do you think it's an optimistic? I believe we are all optimistic here, or we want to be. It seems like. I agree with everything that's been said. A problem for the elderly, for us older ones, is this more modernization, but it's hard. I think there are more journals that that require a membership where you need to pay to publish, and that is against science, and it's a challenge. But I agree with everything that's been said. I would just like we have a few minutes only, but I would like us to reflect on this challenge that's coming for the next season. And that's in the near future, but let's look at it with the same optimism that we just observed. What do you think it's different? What is the different position that we are at in terms of previous years and taking all of the data and information that we have now? Let's be honest, we do not have to be so unrealistic, but how are we doing in terms of data and information? What would be the things that we can still activate or actions that we can take? Or we've been collaborating in different spheres, in different areas, but the season is coming now. It already started technically. So what do you think? How do you see it? Let me start with Paula. I'm not going to refer to the data of the fires because I'm sure Conaf and Jorge will be referring to that in more detail, but I will speak of something that I believe is critical and many cases we've discussed in terms of fire, but threats in general. That is the data collection of threatened areas that immediately after the fact, after the event. It's always hard to do because of the logistical challenges, but that information, if it's not collected immediately, is very hard to reconstruct, and that is tremendously necessary to do all of the studies, the vulnerability impact studies that will help for the prevention afterwards. So I think that's a challenge where we can do much, much more. Jorge. Yes, I believe there's further integration needed in services for services to use the same platforms. I think it's key for platforms to talk to each other. Maybe there's a fire and I do not know there's a nursing home right there. Maybe WMS address would show me that. I think there's more collaboration needed. That's what I meant with the meteorological data. We have a protocol to work with the meteorological directorate, but there's more data now. The 5, the European model, where you can go back and reconstruct models. There's a platform that CR2 did to reconstruct synoptic models where the synoptic event was very marked, as well as the one from 2017 and the one that we had this year in 2023. We already know that, and we need to anticipate to that to raise alerts to the population because, well, we need to. But I think it's because of the coordination. It lies in the coordination to have common language data and easily consumable. I think that's the most practical thing we can do for this season. Rodrigo, very short, please. I do not have anything else to add. I believe, as it was mentioned, all of these things are missing for this season, still have not been implemented, and it's urgent that we do that. Hugh, what do you think? Summer's coming. Yes, we're always speaking about the fire season, but the season is throughout the year. It's all year long. Please, we need to simply think about fighting fires, and this is happening. This is happening through the integrated management of forest fires, wildfires. I am very optimistic, but we need to think about the preparedness and research and allocating more resources to the recovery after the event and managing the risk before it happens. It's happening, and I'm very optimistic about it. But every year, it's a political narrative of, oh, we don't have the budget, we're trying to do our best for the season. But it's for politicians and managers that are not dealing with the problem. They treat everything as an emergency and an act of God. But I'm an idealist, but I'm optimistic at the same time. I believe the situation will improve. Thank you for your vision. I believe several of us share it. So I think it's very good. I would like to close this panel by thanking all of them for their time. I don't know how we managed to do it, but solo para cerrar, quizás nos puedes compartir unos consejos con toda la experiencia que tiene y dado que nos mostró ya la plataforma el día de hoy, ¿cuál cree que es un consejo para nosotros? Voy a intentar, bueno, creo que entendí ya los comentarios en el camino, pero hay dos aspectos. Uno, que hay una gran necesidad de cerrar esta brecha entre lo que la academia puede hacer con los datos y luego convertir esos datos en información sobre la cual se puede actuar, datos accionables. Hay una gran cantidad de personas trabajando en esa área, incluyendo iTrend, lo que es muy importante. Pero voy a enfatizar en algo que tú dijiste, y es que tenemos que aprender de cada uno de los eventos todo lo que podamos, porque para los modelos que se utilizan para el próximo evento y el análisis que se realice para los subsecuentes, ninguno es modelo, por lo que cada modelo que ocurra para de todos ellos tenemos que recopilar todos los datos de cómo se movió el incendio, cuánto fue el impacto, así se puede recalibrar los modelos, se puede mejorar para que así la próxima vez se tenga una mejor simulación, un mejor modelo y predicción sobre la cual actuar. Es por esto que veo una gran interacción, una buena retroalimentación de los ciclos de interacción. Muchas gracias por compartir. Thank you very much to all of the participants in this panel. I tried to ask all of the questions as I could. Now we are out of time. We'll make the information available on the iTrend platform of all of the projects that we'll be reviewing that we know are highly interesting, and we know that many of you might have specific questions on what they're doing, so thank you again. Now, 20 seconds. Oh, wow. I will use those 20 seconds, please. I'll take those. As I requested the first panel members, I'm going to ask you to stand up and please stand together for a photograph, the second one of this seminar. We often participate in so many events, and these leave us with a list of challenges and conversations and pending, and that is so enriching. Thank you. Perfect. As I said, we thank all panelists, and let me remind you what Macarena presented. Chile Resiliente's platform will have available through the iTrend platform. This will be available to all of this information. The social media of iTrend will show several comments, several posts. There will be publications about the seminar. We are finalizing this event, but before that, Catalina Undurraga will give us her closing remarks. I would like to highlight the importance of connecting, of networking. I believe that sometimes as media, we need to be related with the civil society, in this case the Institute, to face a common problem. Now I will give you the floor. Thank you, Pascal.
Thank you, Pascal. Thank you to everybody here. It's been a great morning. We've heard a lot of different things that have been able to take something home with us and bring it back to where we're from, and also the idea and the objective of Chile Resiliente. I loved this link between the first version, which was also in 2023, and it was in January, but now we had two this year. So the 2024, we're going to have the third version, and this is going to continue to have this link and this baseline that basically helps us. How do we work together, and how do we collaborate? How do we visualize what we're already doing so that we can learn from other people and work on a base that already exists in order to help Resiliencia Chile through disasters. So coming in from the Institute, we work on this on a daily basis. I would just like to thank all of the curious and brilliant minds from the iTrend world in order for this to be able to be carried out with this level of quality and good vibes for the people who are watching us through YouTube. And I'm very happy to be able to close this event, and I thank everybody for their diligent work, and we will see you next time in the next version of Chile Resiliente 2024. Thank you very much. So the invitation is up for everybody to just continue to maintain themselves connected through the iTrend platforms, and also find out when there's going to be a new seminar so we can speak about this and the problems that are affecting us all and how necessary it is for us to reflect. We thank everybody who was here present and through YouTube, and the ones who are in Chile Resiliente, as well as all of the participants today through iTrend. Thank you very much and have a great evening.